Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. In 1981, while attending college in New York City, a young man named Isaac Sloan invited his classmate, 25-year-old Rebecca Hartwell, to his apartment under the pretense of working on a poetry translation assignment. She agreed, unaware that she was stepping into a nightmare. As she sat at his desk, reading aloud from a poem, Isaac crept up behind her and fired a small caliber rifle into the back of her neck. She died instantly, but for him, this was just the beginning. Isaac had always felt weak, invisible, and unwanted. He was small, frail, and socially isolated. Rebecca, on the other hand, was tall, charismatic, and full of life. He believed that by consuming her flesh, he could absorb her energy and strength. His first attempt to bite into her raw flesh failed. It was too tough, too unpalatable. So, with terrifying calm, he walked to a nearby hardware store, purchased a butcher's knife, and returned home to begin cutting her apart. He ate parts of her face and chest, documenting every stage of his gruesome meal with Polaroid photographs. He stored what he couldn't finish in the refrigerator, wrapping pieces of her in wax paper for later. For 2 days he lived in his dimly lit apartment, indulging in his twisted fantasy. He prepared her flesh in different ways, pan-seared, raw, seasoned with whatever he had in his pantry. Each time he sat down to eat, he took another photo of his work, ensuring he would never forget. Finally, when her remains became too much to keep hidden, he placed what was left of her inside 2 suitcases and set out to dispose of them in the East River. But fate had other plans. A passerby noticed a man struggling with heavy luggage near the docks and alerted a nearby patrol officer. When authorities stopped him, they discovered the horrifying contents of the suitcases. Isaac was arrested immediately, but the nightmare wasn't over. His family was wealthy, well-connected in legal circles, and eager to protect their name. They hired a top defense attorney who successfully argued that Isaac was legally insane and should not stand trial. Instead of prison, he was sent to a psychiatric hospital, deemed too unstable to face justice. It should have ended there, but it didn't. A well-known true crime author wrote a book detailing the case, and Isaac Sloan became infamous. His name spread like wildfire, attracting both horror and fascination. People wanted to know what drove a man to commit such an unspeakable act. Then came the twist that no one saw coming. After years in the institution, doctors re-evaluated him and suddenly declared him sane. With no legal grounds to hold him and no active criminal charges, Isaac was released. He had escaped justice entirely. Not only was he a free man, but he embraced his infamy. His photograph appeared on magazine covers, his story was turned into a best-selling book, and he was even invited to review restaurants. A sick irony that no one could believe was real. The very man who had butchered and eaten another human being was now profiting off his crime. Isaac took full advantage. He wrote explicit accounts of what he had done to Rebecca, gave interviews, and even appeared on late-night talk shows. His dead-eyed stare and smug smile made it clear that he knew exactly what he had gotten away with. For years he lived freely, making money off his own horror. But time was not kind to him. The public turned against him. His once loyal audience grew disgusted. He became a recluse, rejected by society, unable to find work. His name, once a dark curiosity, became a stain no one wanted to be associated with. His health declined, and his past sins caught up with him. Now he lives in the shadows, a man once hungry for power, now devoured by his own legacy. But for Rebecca Hartwell, there was no second chance, no escape. Her life was stolen, her dignity violated, and her memory desecrated by the very man who took her. Her murderer lived freely, and he loved every second of it. When I booked that cruise out of Miami, I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I just wanted a break from college deadlines, my part-time job, and the constant stress that seemed to follow me everywhere. The plan was simple: relax, eat too much at the buffet, maybe catch a show. I had no idea that this trip would haunt me long after I stepped back on land. We set sail on a bright Thursday morning. The air smelled like salt and sunscreen, and everyone around me buzzed with excitement. I stood at the deck's railing, watching Miami's skyline shrink behind us, letting the ocean breeze cool my skin. It finally felt like I could breathe. That first day was great. I lounged by the pool, sipped iced drinks, and made casual small talk with other passengers. But that evening, something strange happened. I noticed a man lingering in the corridors near the cabins. He was older, maybe late 50s, with thinning hair and an unsettlingly pale complexion. At first, I figured he was just another passenger taking a walk. But something about him seemed off. He kept glancing around, shifting from foot to foot like he was nervous or guilty. I told myself I was just being paranoid. By day 2, I wasn't so sure. I saw him again, too often to be coincidence. Whether I was in line for the buffet or browsing the ship's souvenir shop, he was always nearby. Not close enough to speak, but close enough that I noticed. The worst part: every time I caught his gaze, he quickly looked away. My stomach twisted with unease. Maybe he was just a weird old guy, but something about the way he watched me made my skin crawl. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cabin felt stuffy, even with the AC blasting. I turned on the TV, some late-night rerun of an old sitcom, but the artificial laughter made the room feel even more hollow. Then, at 2 a.m., I heard it. The soft jiggling of my cabin door handle. I froze. The rattling stopped. I held my breath, waiting, listening. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just some drunk passenger mistaking my room for theirs. But I still locked the deadbolt and shoved my suitcase in front of the door, just in case. By day 3, I was ready for a distraction. I signed up for a shore excursion, snorkeling at a private island. It was supposed to be the highlight of my trip, but I could barely enjoy it. I felt like I was being watched. The weirdest part: the man wasn't there. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that followed me like a shadow. Back on the ship, I headed straight to my cabin to shower. The hallway was nearly empty. Most passengers were still out on the island or drinking at the bars. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the corridor, staring. Before I could react, he slipped into the stairwell. A wave of panic surged through me. I wanted to run after him, to demand what his deal was, but I couldn't make my legs move. That night, I went to one of the ship's shows, hoping the crowd would make me feel safer. Halfway through the performance, I saw him a few rows behind me. He wasn't looking at the stage. He was watching me. I tried to focus on the show, but my mind was screaming. Why was he following me? I needed air. At midnight, I headed out onto the deck, hoping the sea breeze would calm me. The sky stretched endlessly black, the water below shimmering under the ship's lights. For the first time in days, I felt a little relief. Then, footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I turned. He was there, standing just 20 feet away, leaning against the railing. His face unreadable, his gaze locked on the ocean. But I knew he had seen me come outside. I ran. My heart pounded as I rushed back to my cabin, practically sprinting through the narrow hallway. Inside, I shoved a chair under the doorknob, my hands shaking. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I wasn't. All I knew was that I wanted off that ship. The next morning, we docked back in Miami. I bolted off the ship the moment I could, barely looking back. I thought it was over. Then, as I waited to pick up my luggage, I saw him. Standing alone, watching. His suitcase rested at his side, but he wasn't in any hurry. He just stood there staring at me. His expression was unreadable, almost satisfied. We never spoke, never had a confrontation, but somehow his presence unraveled me in a way I can't explain. I've been home for a few weeks now, trying to slip back into my usual routine, but sometimes in class or at work, I catch myself checking over my shoulder, just in case. I never figured out who he was, or what he wanted. But some things don't need an explanation. They just cling to you, refusing to let go. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when you couldn't explain why? What would you do if you noticed a stranger following you on a trip? Back in 2019, I worked for Tony's Pizza, a small, family-run pizza shop in Hollow Creek, West Virginia, a quiet town with miles of empty roads and houses few and far between. It was my first night on the job. I had only taken the gig to make some extra cash for college expenses, books, dorm supplies, food, nothing serious. It was just a side hustle to get by, because I was new, I was being trained. When you're in training, the manager rides along with you for the first few deliveries to observe, evaluate, and teach you the process. That night it was me, our manager Tom, and another new trainee named Kyle. It was late, around 8:00 p.m., when we got an order for 4 large pizzas and 2 bottles of Dr. Pepper. But unlike modern pizza places where you can see a customer's location on a screen, our store was old school. We had to look up the address manually on our phones. The location, way out of town. Now in Hollow Creek, that wasn't uncommon. A lot of people lived on secluded properties miles from the main roads. It took us about 20 minutes to get there. When we finally pulled up, my stomach sank. The house was old, really old. A 2-story farmhouse, completely falling apart, wood chipping, windows boarded up, the porch sagging like it could collapse at any second. It looked abandoned. Kyle spoke first. People actually live here." I looked at Tom, expecting him to say, "Let's get out of here." But instead he sighed. "Come on, guys. We just dropped the pizza, take the cash, and leave." Reluctantly, Kyle and I grabbed the pizzas and followed Tom to the front door. As we stepped onto the creaky porch, Kyle froze. "Someone's watching us." I turned my head in the direction he was staring, toward the furthest upstairs window. For just a second, I thought I saw it too. A figure, just standing there, watching. Tom sighed. "You guys are paranoid. This'll take 2 minutes. Just be nice." I don't know where I found the nerve, but I rang the doorbell. Of course, it didn't work. So Tom pounded on the door instead. No answer. We waited 15 seconds. Knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. The air was thick with the smell of something rotten. I couldn't tell if it was the house itself or if something had died inside. Then, after a full minute, the door creaked open, but only partway. A thin, older man, maybe in his 50s, peered out. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, raspy. Tom cleared his throat. "Pizza delivery." The man's expression changed instantly. His face lit up, and suddenly he was way too friendly. "Oh yes, the pizzas. I'll be right back with the money." He unlocked the door completely and disappeared inside, leaving the door wide open. And that's when I saw it. Inside, the house was completely empty. No furniture. No decorations. Just bare wooden floors and a few crumpled blankets in the corner. Kyle and I exchanged looks. This man wasn't just living here. He was squatting. That's when we heard it. Footsteps. Coming from upstairs. More than one person. Kyle's face went pale. "Dude, I told you. Someone was watching us." My stomach twisted into knots. We weren't alone. Tom yelled into the house. "Sir, do you have the money?" Silence. The footsteps stopped. Everything went dead silent. The air was so still, I could hear the 3 of us breathing. Tom sighed. "You 2 stay here. I'll go check around back." I wanted to protest, but I just nodded. We watched him disappear around the side of the house. Then, we heard more footsteps. But this time, they weren't upstairs. They were below us. Kyle and I both went still. I whispered, "How the hell can there be a basement?" Before Kyle could answer, we heard Tom scream. A full, panicked scream followed by frantic running. And then, suddenly, he was back in front of the house. Get in the air, now. Kyle and I didn't ask questions. We dropped the pizzas, bolted for the car, and I had the engine running before Tom's door even shut. I peeled out of there so fast my tires kicked up gravel and dirt. Only when we were a few miles away did Tom finally catch his breath and tell us what he saw. There was a group of people out back, just sitting around a tiny fire. Kyle and I stayed silent, waiting. They were laughing, not talking, just laughing. Then he swallowed hard. In the middle of the circle, they had a baby deer. Kyle and I both stiffened. Tom's hands were shaking. It was still alive. They were just watching it, laughing at it. I felt sick. I'd seen a lot of weird things in my life, but something about this, it wasn't normal. It wasn't just a homeless guy squatting in an abandoned house. It was something else, something worse. Neither Kyle nor I went back to work after that night. And a month later, Tom quit too. I don't know if the police ever looked into it. I don't know if anyone still lives there. But one thing is for sure. I'll never work a delivery job again. And I'll never forget that laughing. Would you have gone around back? Or would you have left the second you saw that house? This happened in the countryside of Tennessee. I was 15 years old at the time. My older brother, Seb, was 18 and had a thing for exploring creepy places. He had heard about this huge abandoned house from a friend, an old Victorian home, long forgotten, swallowed by the woods. I guess he didn't want to go alone. One afternoon, he dragged me along. Seb parked the car in a hidden spot behind a thick cluster of trees. From where we stood, the house wasn't even visible. We had to walk down this long, cracked driveway that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The whole place felt swallowed by nature. Grass had grown waist-high around us. Weeds pushed through the broken pavement. The air smelled stale, thick, and heavy. Then we saw her, a woman, walking behind us. At first, I thought maybe she was just a local out for a walk. But something felt wrong. "What do we do?" I whispered. "Just play it cool," Seb muttered. "If we run, it'll look weird." So we kept walking. The woman had her hands folded behind her back, as if she were just strolling through a park. Her pace was slow, but steady. I glanced back. She was closer, and she was smiling. "Lovely day today, isn't it?" she said softly. Seb and I both mumbled a quick yeah. She didn't stop walking, didn't slow down. She just kept getting closer. Then, just as she was right behind us, she said something weird. "I have to go to bed now." Seb and I locked eyes, and in that split second, we knew we needed to move. We picked up the pace. We didn't run, but we walked fast, faster than we ever had. Seb turned around one last time and forced a polite, "Have a great day, man," but she was gone. She had disappeared. The only way she could have vanished that quickly was if she had stepped into the woods. I felt my skin crawl. Something about it was deeply unsettling, but we shook it off and kept walking. When we finally reached the house, it was bigger than we expected. An old Victorian-style mansion. Its once grand exterior was now rotting and covered in ivy. Most of the windows were shattered, a sign that we weren't the first to explore it. We climbed through one of the broken windows, making sure not to cut ourselves. Inside, it looked like whoever had lived here had just left. The furniture was still there. Pictures still hung on the walls. Even the fridge was full of ancient, rotting food. Opening it was like getting punched in the face with the smell of death. Then we found the basement. The steps were steep and crumbling, but we made it down. The whole place was a mess. Old papers, furniture, broken dishes, just stuff scattered everywhere. Then we heard it. A thump. Upstairs, we froze. The air went still. We stood there for what felt like forever, listening. Nothing. Probably just the house settling. Still, we had seen enough of the basement. We climbed back up to the first floor. The only place left to check was upstairs. At the top of the stairs was a bathroom directly in front of us. To the left, a hallway led to an open bedroom door. The hallway then turned sharply left. Seb went first. The first bedroom we entered was small, not the master bedroom, but still fully furnished. A double bed, an antique dresser, and even clothes still in the drawers. Then Seb stepped back into the hall. And suddenly, "Dude," he whispered, "look." I followed his gaze down the hall, and my stomach dropped. She was there, the woman, standing in the doorway at the end of the hall, smiling. The same eerie smile as before, but now her head was tilted slightly, and she said something that sent ice down my spine. "Do you want to see what's behind my back?" Seb didn't hesitate. "Nope." He shoved me toward the stairs. We ran. I couldn't stop myself. I glanced back. She didn't move. She just stood there watching. But as we crashed through the front door and sprinted into the woods, I had the horrible feeling she was still there, still watching. By the time we reached the car, my lungs felt like they were on fire. I gagged, nearly throwing up from exhaustion. We locked the doors. Seb started the car. We didn't say a word, not until we were miles away. Even then, it was only whispered theories. Maybe she was just some homeless lady. Maybe she was off her meds. Maybe she lived in that house. But none of it explained everything. Like how she vanished into the woods so fast. Or how she got inside that house before we did. Or most terrifying of all, what did she have behind her back? And had she been holding it the whole time she was walking behind us? We'll never know. And honestly, I never want to. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. There's an abandoned motel just off the highway called the Blackwood Motel. It's been empty for at least a decade, maybe longer. I do a lot of solo urban exploration, sometimes even at night. The Blackwood Motel sits on the outskirts of Silver Springs, Colorado, and during the day, the heat is unbearable. Too hot to be walking around with my backpack. That's why I chose to go at night. Getting there was easy. I parked just off the road and walked up. No fences, no signs, no security. One of the easiest structures I've ever explored. In the back, there was a deep, empty pool covered in graffiti. When I shined my flashlight up at the second floor, I noticed that half the doors were cracked open or completely shattered. Creepy, sure, but expected. The place had been abandoned for years. A section of the motel had clearly burned down at some point. Charred wood, collapsed walls, soot streaked floors. I took my time walking around, my footsteps crunching over broken glass and debris. The silence was unsettling. No passing traffic, no animals, no wind, just my own breathing and the occasional creak of old wood. Then I heard a voice. It was a woman, a quiet murmur coming from somewhere nearby. Instantly, my blood ran cold. In these situations, my first instinct is always the same: hide. I don't assume ghosts. I assume security, squatters, or worse. I quickly slipped into one of the lower level rooms and shut off my flashlight. I stood there listening. Silence. After a minute, I switched the light back on. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Graffiti, filthy floors, old furniture. A dresser with a few broken drawers. A disgusting, stained mattress on the floor. I wondered if homeless people ever crashed here, but honestly, the place was so far from civilization, I doubted it. I stepped back outside and continued exploring. Peeking into the rooms as I walked, I saw the same rotting furniture, broken glass, strange messages on the walls. Then I heard it. A crash. From upstairs. My heart skipped a beat. I stepped back and aimed my flashlight up toward the second floor walkway. I stared at the shattered doors, my pulse pounding. Logic told me it was probably an animal knocking something over, but there was always the other possibility. Another explorer, a squatter. I decided to check it out. Moving up the stairs, I peeked into each room, careful and slow. Same old wreckage. Then, halfway down the walkway, I heard it. Thump. A pause. Thump. A pause. A slow, rhythmic banging. Someone was in there. I approached the door where the sound was coming from. As I got closer, the banging stopped. They heard me. My mouth went dry. I spoke up. "Hey, I'm just an explorer, not here to cause trouble." My voice sounded too shaky. No response. I peered inside. My flashlight was off, but even in the darkness, I thought I saw a shape, a figure, standing near the back wall. Then the smell hit me. Rot, filth, human waste. I jerked my head back, fumbling for my flashlight, trying not to shine it directly inside just yet. Instead, I pointed it down, illuminating the floor first. Then slowly, I angled it upward. That's when I saw them. Bare feet, moving, fast. In an instant, I flicked the light higher and I saw her. A woman. Her forehead was bloody, skin pale, grayish, her mouth hanging open, yellow filth oozing from her lips. I barely had a second to react before she lunged. I ran. She screamed, a raw, animalistic sound, and she was right behind me. I flew down the stairs, sprinting for my car. My legs burned. My breath came in ragged gasps, but I didn't stop, didn't dare turn around. I didn't hear footsteps anymore, didn't hear her screams, but I wasn't stopping to check. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and peeled out of there so fast my tires kicked up dust. Only once I was several miles away did I finally pull over, shaking, my chest heaving. I called my friend George. He's into this kind of thing too. Urban exploration, abandoned buildings. I had invited him to come with me that night, but he was busy. I told him everything. We sat in silence for a second before he spoke. "You know what that banging sound was, right?" I swallowed. "She was banging her head against the wall," he said. "That's why her forehead was bloody." I felt my stomach turn. "Should I call the police?" I asked, mostly thinking out loud. No way, dude. You'd be admitting to trespassing. Still, something felt wrong. I drove around town for a bit, near the gas stations and fast food joints, looking for a payphone so I could make an anonymous call. But payphones don't exist anymore. It was stupid, a waste of time. Eventually, I called the non-emergency number from my cell, reported a deranged woman at the abandoned Blackwood Motel, told them I had overheard someone else talking about her, kept my story vague. Then I hung up. I don't know if the police ever went out there. I don't know what was wrong with that woman, but she should have been in a psych ward or somewhere. In all my years of urban exploration, I've never encountered anything like that. It happened years ago, but I still think about it. Our parents had left town for a 3-day business conference, leaving me in charge of my 15-year-old sister, Emily. I was 17, almost done with high school, and already planning my first semester at the local community college. We lived in a quiet neighborhood in Silver Springs, a small Pennsylvania town where nothing ever really happened, until that weekend. The first night was normal. Emily and I ordered takeout and watched bad reality TV in the living room. Around 11 p.m., she started getting uneasy. The wind howled outside, and every little creak in the house felt louder than usual. I teased her about it, blaming our old pipes and drafty windows, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and we both went to bed. Even though the house felt eerily still, I managed to fall asleep quickly. The second day passed without incident. Emily spent the afternoon on the phone with her best friend, going over their biology project, while I tinkered with some design software for my senior project. We didn't talk about the night before. Honestly, I'd already forgotten about it. That night, I sat up in the living room with my laptop, working on a final paper while the TV played a muted news report. Emily decided to make dinner. Something simple, just pasta and tomato sauce. Around 10 p.m., I heard her moving around in the kitchen, pots clanking and water running. Then suddenly, a sharp scream. I bolted into the kitchen and found her pressed against the counter, her face pale. She pointed at the window above the sink, whispering frantically. There was a man, she said, barely able to get the words out. Outside. He was just standing there, staring. He was covered in blood. My stomach dropped. I ran to the window and peered out. The porch light cast a dull glow over our small backyard, but I didn't see anyone, just the overgrown hedges and the empty stretch of grass leading to the woods beyond. My pulse hammered in my ears. Had someone really been standing there, or was Emily just spooked by the shadows? I tried to calm her down, telling her maybe it was just her imagination playing tricks, but I could see the terror in her eyes. She wasn't making it up. We locked the doors, pulled the blinds shut, and forced ourselves to eat, though neither of us had much of an appetite. The air inside the house felt heavier, like the walls were closing in. We double-checked every lock before heading upstairs. Emily was too scared to sleep alone, so I sat with her until she finally dozed off. Then I returned to my own room, convinced the worst was over. At around 3 a.m., a loud, furious knocking rattled the front door. I bolted upright in bed, heart hammering. The sound was relentless, urgent, angry, like someone was trying to force their way inside. The walls seemed to shake with every hit. I held my breath, frozen in place. The knocking went on for what felt like forever. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence swallowed the house. I strained to hear anything, footsteps, voices, movement, but all I could make out was the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. My body refused to move. I sat there, ears ringing, until exhaustion finally took over. By morning, curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know if someone had really been there. I grabbed a bag of trash from the kitchen and stepped outside toward the garbage bins. The air was crisp, the kind of morning where you could see your breath. That's when I saw him. A man lay face down in the grass near the back of the yard. For a moment, I thought he might be hurt, maybe drunk or injured. But as I stepped closer, a sickening realization washed over me. His clothes were soaked in blood. His face was turned away, motionless. He wasn't breathing. I staggered back, my stomach twisting in knots. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911. The police arrived within minutes. Officer Henderson and his team examined the scene while another officer pulled Emily and me aside. The questions came fast. Had we seen anyone? Heard anything unusual? Could we identify the man? We told them everything. Emily's sighting, the knocking at the door, the eerie silence afterward. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but had no answers. They searched the yard, the tree line, even checked in with our neighbors. No one had seen or heard a thing. By the time my parents got home that afternoon, the body was gone, the crime scene tape was up, and we were left with more questions than answers. The police never found any weapons, no sign of a struggle, no indication of how the man had gotten there or why he had been covered in blood. No ID, no missing person reports. Nothing. To this date, his name remains unknown. The case was quietly shelved, another unsolved mystery in a town where things like this weren't supposed to happen. But Emily and I remember. I still can't shake the feeling that we weren't just witnesses. We were part of something. Something we weren't supposed to see. And every time I walk into the kitchen, I feel it all over again. I imagine Emily standing there that night, staring out the window, frozen in terror. I see the shadowy figure watching us from the dark. And I keep asking myself the same question. Why our house? Why us? We never got an answer. Have you ever looked outside your window at night and felt like someone was staring back? What would you do if the eyes looking in were real? I lost my little girl back in 2012. Even now, saying it out loud feels like swallowing broken glass. We were living in Asheville, North Carolina back then, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood at the edge of town. She passed suddenly, too suddenly for me to understand, let alone accept. Ever since, visiting her burial site at Hollow Pines Cemetery became my way of holding on to her. It was where I went when the memories got too heavy, where I whispered the words I wished I'd said more when she was alive. If you've ever lost someone, maybe you know that pull. A quiet cemetery at night, the strange comfort of stillness, like time itself is pausing for you. But there's something else about it too. something eerie. When the sun sets and the headstones cast long shadows, it's easy to feel like you're not alone. One evening, I couldn't sleep. Grief comes in waves, and that night it hit like a hurricane. It wasn't my daughter's exact anniversary, but close enough that it didn't matter. I needed to see her resting place. A friend had once warned me about wandering cemeteries after dark, how it wasn't just trespassing, but how some things weren't meant to be disturbed. I told myself I wasn't disturbing anything. I just wanted to visit my girl. By the time I reached the iron gates of Hollow Pines, it was nearly 10:30 p.m. The air had that early autumn bite, crisp enough to make me pull my jacket tight around me. A single street lamp flickered at the far end of the road, casting a dim yellow glow. There were no cars, no footsteps, just silence. That's when I noticed the gate. It wasn't locked. Hollow Pines was supposed to close at dusk. The entrance was usually chained up by the caretaker, but tonight the gate stood slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness yawned between the bars. Maybe they forgot to lock it. Maybe they assumed no one would be foolish enough to wander in after dark. I hesitated. Then I stepped inside. By day, Hollow Pines was almost beautiful. Rolling green hills, carved angels perched atop headstones, winding cobblestone paths. But at night, the place transformed. Shadows clung to the crypts, and the rustling of leaves sounded too much like whispers. My footsteps crunched on the gravel path as I moved forward, trying not to think about how loud each step seemed. As I neared my daughter's grave, that feeling crept in, the one I couldn't quite name. The weight in the air, the sensation of being watched. I've visited her dozens of times, and never once had I felt that way. I shook it off, knelt down, and placed my hand against the cold stone of her headstone. "I miss you, sweetheart," I whispered. I don't know how long I sat there, caught between grief and the quiet hum of the night. But then I heard it. A sound behind me. At first, I told myself it was just the wind, just my mind playing tricks. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. 3 figures, dressed in white, standing near the edge of the cemetery, barely touched by the moonlight. I froze. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Caretakers, mourners, some kind of late-night vigil. But nothing made sense. They weren't moving like normal people. Their motions were too slow, too deliberate. Their heads turned in eerie unison, scanning the rows of graves as if looking for something, or someone. I swallowed hard. I wanted to believe they hadn't noticed me, that they were just there for their own reasons. But then, my foot slipped on the gravel. The sound was small, almost nothing. And yet, one of the figures snapped its head toward me. It didn't tilt. It didn't hesitate. It turned directly toward me, as though it had heard me perfectly. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I took a careful step back, forcing myself to move slowly, to blend with the shadows. The figures didn't speak. They didn't call out, but they started moving. Toward me. I couldn't make out their faces in the dim light, but the way they moved, gliding, soundless, made my stomach twist. There were no flashlights, no phones, no sign that they were normal people, just white fabric swaying in the cold night air. I turned and walked. Not too fast, not yet, just enough to create distance. My body screamed to run, but something told me that drawing attention would be worse. The cemetery paths twisted around old mausoleums and towering statues. I tried to keep my steps light, weaving through the graves, avoiding the crunch of dried leaves. Then I heard whispering. It was low, urgent, just behind me. I turned a corner sharply, my breath catching in my throat. The entrance had to be close. I just had to keep moving. But every shadow looked unfamiliar now, every tombstone a stranger. The whispers grew louder, curling through the night air, words I couldn't quite understand. And then, finally, I saw it. The gate, still open. I didn't think. I sprinted. My feet pounded against the gravel as I raced toward the exit, lungs burning. I hit the sidewalk with a stumbling step, nearly collapsing onto the pavement. My hands braced against my knees as I gasped for air. I turned back. The cemetery was empty. No figures, No whispering. Just rows of silent graves stretching into the darkness. Relief flooded through me, but it didn't last long. Because across the street, sitting in the shadows, was an old white van. Its headlights were off. Someone sat in the driver's seat, their silhouette barely visible behind the glass. But as I stood there, shaking, the figure inside leaned forward, watching. My stomach clenched. Then the engine rumbled to life. The van didn't speed off. It rolled slowly, deliberately, the way a predator moves when it knows you see it, but isn't done playing yet. It disappeared around the corner without ever turning on its lights. I stood there for what felt like forever. Eventually, I forced myself to walk home. I locked my doors. I checked the windows 3 times. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Even now, I can't shake the questions. Were those figures tied to the van? Had I stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see? Or was it all just some strange, disconnected coincidence? I haven't gone back to Hollow Pines Cemetery after dark. And I don't think I ever will. Have you ever felt like someone, was watching you in a place that should have been empty? What would you do if you saw something you couldn't explain? In the early hours of July 7th, 1993, everything came to a screeching halt. The streets of Seattle, usually alive with music and movement, fell silent when a passerby stumbled upon the body of Mia Carter. She was lying in the middle of an empty road, her face swollen and bruised, her body twisted unnaturally. She had been beaten mercilessly, so badly that even if she hadn't been strangled to death, she would have succumbed to her internal injuries. She was just 27 years old. The drawstrings of her band hoodie had been used to end her life. An investigation began. On the evening of July 6th, Mia had been out drinking with friends in Seattle's Capitol Hill district, a neighborhood filled with dive bars, coffee houses, and the underground music scene that had become her second home. Around 2 a.m., she left the bar alone, heading out into the night. She was looking for her ex-boyfriend, hoping to reconnect, but after failing to find him, she stopped by another friend's apartment for a brief visit. Not long after, she left alone again, disappearing into the darkness. 80 minutes later, a woman walking along a deserted street found Mia's lifeless body sprawled out on the pavement, just 2 miles from the bar where she had last been seen alive. For years, the case went nowhere. The police had no leads, no witnesses, no fingerprints. The only DNA evidence they managed to recover didn't match anyone in the system. By 1998, 5 years after the investigation began, Seattle detectives admitted they were no closer to solving Mia's murder than they had been on day one. As the case stalled, Mia's bandmates, desperate for justice, took matters into their own hands. They organized benefit concerts, raising money to hire a private investigator. Nirvana even joined in, performing at one of the shows to bring attention to Mia's case. Several well-known artists contributed to a fundraising album, and by the end of the campaign, the effort had generated $70,000, enough to keep a private investigator on the case for 3 years. But despite the public outcry, despite the national attention, despite all their efforts, nothing happened. Mia's case faded into obscurity. The investigation went cold. Then, in 2002, nearly a decade after her murder, the break they had been waiting for finally came. A DNA swab from the crime scene, collected 9 years earlier, was run through the system again. This time, there was a match. The DNA belonged to a man in Florida, a drifter named Jesse Morales, who had just been arrested for an unrelated crime. Detectives pulled his records. In 1993, the year of Mia's death, Jesse had been living in Seattle. He had an extensive criminal history, a violent past, and an unmistakable pattern of targeting women. When police brought him in for questioning, at first, he was calm and composed. But when they asked him a simple question, "Have you ever killed anyone in Seattle?" his demeanor changed instantly. He exploded in rage. It was all the confirmation detectives needed. That same day, he was charged with Mia's murder. At trial, prosecutors asked him the one question he couldn't answer: how did your DNA end up on Mia's body if you never met her? Jessa refused to respond. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning with a guilty verdict. The judge sentenced him to 37 years in prison. He later appealed. His sentence was reduced to 36 years. Though no one can say for certain what happened that night, the most widely accepted theory is chilling. Jessa had been at the bar that night watching Mia. When she left alone, he followed her to her friend's apartment and waited outside in the shadows. She had been wearing headphones, lost in her own world. She never heard him creeping up behind her. He overpowered her, dragged her into his car, and ended her life. In the wake of Mia's death, her friends and bandmates refused to let her name be forgotten. They formed a nonprofit organization called Home Alive, dedicated to teaching self-defense to women, ensuring that no one else would suffer the same fate. Not long after her passing, the grunge era itself began to fade. With the death of Kurt Cobain, the scene lost much of its momentum, swallowed by the changing tides of the music industry. But Mia's legacy never died. Her music, her fierce energy, and the impact she made on those around her live on. In the hearts of those who still remember, in the songs she left behind, and in every woman who learned how to fight back because of what happened to her that night. Mia Carter's voice still echoes. I've been driving trucks for over 15 years, and in that time, I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road, odd people, eerie rest stops, places that just don't sit right with you. But nothing has ever gotten under my skin quite like what happened one night in Tennessee, just outside of Jackson, in the fall of 2019. I was hauling a load of produce from Dallas to Nashville, running late and needing to stop for the night. I pulled into a small truck stop just off I-40, a Flying J near an old, run-down diner called Maddie's. It wasn't my first time stopping there. It wasn't the worst place, but something about it always felt off. Noodles, my scruffy old mutt and loyal co-pilot, sat up in the passenger seat, sniffing the air as I pulled in. Normally, he'd just curl up and sleep the second I parked, but tonight, his ears perked up. He was alert. I should have taken that as a warning. The lot was half full, a handful of rigs idling in the cool October air. It was too quiet for a truck stop. No sound of chatter, no rumbling engines, no radio music drifting from a nearby cab, just the buzz of the streetlights overhead. As I climbed out of my truck, I felt it immediately, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I scanned the lot. Nothing. Just rows of trucks and the faint neon glow of the diner's flickering sign in the distance. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I grabbed my wallet, patted Noodles, and told him I'd be back soon. He didn't look happy about it. His eyes followed me as I locked the door behind me. Inside Maddie's, the smell of burnt coffee and fried food hit me like a wall. The place was mostly empty, just a tired-looking waitress behind the counter and an older man hunched over a plate of something unappetizing in the corner. I picked the booth by the window and ordered something simple: eggs, bacon, toast. Nothing fancy. The waitress nodded, barely looking up. The radio hummed low in the background, some old country song from the 80s. It wasn't until I got up to use the restroom that things took a turn. I was gone for maybe 2 minutes. When I came back, everything looked exactly the same, except for one thing. My fork had moved, not by much, just a couple of inches to the left. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe the waitress had come by, but my plate was untouched, and I hadn't heard anyone near my table. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I scanned the room. The older man in the corner was still there, staring down at his plate. The waitress was behind the counter, writing something down. No one else. Trying to shake it off, I sat back down and finished my food quickly. But I couldn't stop glancing around. Couldn't stop feeling like something was wrong. I paid my bill and left. Back at the truck, Noodles was pacing in the cab, whining softly. "Relax, buddy," I muttered, unlocking the door. Then, as I climbed in, my eyes drifted past the lot, toward the trees beyond the gas station. And that's when I saw him. A figure, standing just at the tree line, too far to make out a face. Too still to be just some random guy stretching his legs, watching me. I froze, my hand still on the door handle. Then he moved, not toward me, not away. Just a slow, unnatural shift, like he wanted me to know that he saw me too. The air inside the cab felt suffocating. Noodles let out a low guttural growl, his fur bristling. I locked the doors. The figure stood there for a few more seconds. Then, without warning, he disappeared. Not walked away. Disappeared. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I was still shaken. I debated reporting it to someone, but what would I even say? Hey, some guy stood in the woods last night and stared at me. Instead, I went inside the Flying J to grab a coffee before heading out. On a whim, I asked the cashier, an older guy with deep lines on his face, if he'd ever seen anything weird around here. He sighed and rubbed his chin. Yeah, now and then. Solo truckers mostly. Say they see someone lurking, messing with their trucks. Police never find him. That cold feeling came back. I told him about my fork, the figure in the woods. His expression didn't change. Then he asked me something that made my stomach drop. Did you check your food? I stared at him. What do you mean? He sighed again. A couple of years back, some guy was drugging food in the diner, slipping stuff in drinks and meals. Never got caught. But after the cops got involved, the reports stopped. Until a few months ago, I felt sick. I hadn't noticed anything weird about my meal. I felt fine. But the thought that someone had been at my table, had touched my food. I thanked him and walked back to my truck, feeling my skin crawl. Noodles was still on edge, his eyes darting toward the woods as I climbed in. I didn't waste any time. I fired up the engine and got the hell out of Jackson. And I never stopped there again. That was years ago. But sometimes, when I'm on the road at night, I still feel it. That prickling on the back of my neck. Like someone somewhere is watching. In 2017, I took my SUV deep into the wilderness, far from paved roads, far from towns, and far from anyone. I wanted isolation, a multi-day off-road camping trip, just me and the quiet of the forest. No distractions, no responsibilities, just open land and endless sky. The plan was simple: find a scenic spot, park, and camp under the stars. I filled my tank, packed plenty of water, double-checked my gear, and left the city behind. Hours later, the last paved road vanished in my rearview mirror. I found the perfect clearing near a quiet stream. The water barely flowed, just a soft trickle against the rocks. Towering pines surrounded me, their long shadows stretching across the dirt as the sun dipped low. No signs of people. No trails. Just the wind in the trees and the distant call of birds. It was perfect. I set up camp, built a small fire, and cooked a simple meal. As darkness fell, I sipped tea, watching the first stars blink into existence. Wrapped in my jacket, I felt at peace, alone but content. Eventually, the night grew colder. I climbed into my SUV, where I had converted the back into a makeshift sleeping space. The seats were gone, leaving plenty of room to stretch out. After zipping into my sleeping bag, I turned off the lantern. The silence felt safe. I drifted off fast. Then I woke up. Something was off. I held my breath, listening. A sound, low, rhythmic, distant. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was chanting. My eyes snapped open, heart hammering. The voices were faint, carried by the breeze, but undeniable. I hadn't seen another soul for miles. So who was out here? And why were they chanting in the middle of the night? I reached for the knife beside my sleeping bag, gripping it tight. My breathing was slow, controlled, but my mind raced. No cell service, no way to call for help. I told myself it had to be a group camping nearby, but deep down, I knew it didn't make sense. I forced myself to lie still, knife in hand. Somehow, I drifted off again. Then came the knock. Soft at first, a light tapping against the glass of my SUV. I stopped breathing. The tapping grew louder, more deliberate. A cold, creeping terror crawled up my spine. The windows were fogged from my breath, but through the haze, I saw it. A shadow. A face pressed against the glass, peering inside. My pulse exploded. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I let out a raw, guttural scream, something primal, something desperate. The figure jerked back. For a split second, I saw wide eyes staring at me. Then it turned and vanished. No sound of footsteps, no breaking branches, just silence. I sat there frozen, my knife still clenched in my fist. My chest heaved, my ears ringing. Who was that? What did they want? I reached for the keys with shaking hands and started the SUV. The headlights flooded the clearing, cutting through the dark. Nothing. Just trees. Just shadows. I kept the engine running for over an hour, scanning the woods, jumping at every sound, waiting. When exhaustion finally crept in, I shut off the engine to conserve fuel, but I kept my knife in my grip until my hands ached. Morning brought no comfort. I stepped out cautiously, scanning the ground. Then I saw them. Footprints. Small. Barefoot. Like someone had been circling my SUV. My stomach twisted. I packed up fast. I needed to leave. The forest no longer felt inviting. I needed distance. I drove for hours, following winding dirt roads. Every sound put me on edge. Every shadow made me flinch. Finally, I found another clearing, this one near a rocky hill. It felt safer than the last spot. But the unease never left. I forced myself to stay busy, checking my gear, gathering firewood, anything to keep my mind occupied. But as the sun began to set, my nerves started unraveling. I built a larger fire than usual, the flames stretching high into the night. I set up a circle of sticks around my camp, a warning system, just in case. That night, I sat by the fire, clutching a cup of tea. The shadows at the edge of the clearing felt alive. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the memory of that face at my window. When it was time to sleep, I locked myself inside the SUV again, knife in hand. I barely drifted off before. Snap. A branch breaking. Nearby. I bolted upright. Another snap. Closer. I reached for the keys. The sound grew louder. I turned the ignition. Headlights flooded the trees. Nothing. Then, in the distance, a figure, darting between the trees just beyond the light's reach. Too quick to see clearly, but it was there, then gone, swallowed by the dark. I didn't sleep. I sat upright until dawn, gripping my knife like my life depended on it. And when the first light broke through the trees, I left. For good. I drove until I hit the main road. Only then did my chest loosen. Only then did I finally breathe. But even now, back in civilization, I still wonder. Who was out there? Why had they come to my camp? And most of all, what would have happened if I hadn't woken up in time? Have you ever felt like you were being watched in the wilderness? What would you do if you encountered someone or something unexpected on a solo camping trip? Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I was hauling freight down Highway 50, the loneliest road in America. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning, and the only thing keeping me awake was some talk radio, the kind where callers ramble about aliens and government conspiracies. The road stretched out ahead of me, nothing but asphalt and darkness, no headlights in my mirrors, no taillights ahead, just me and the highway. Then, out of nowhere, a car came up fast behind me, a silver sedan, maybe a Honda or a Toyota, barreling down like a bat out of hell. I remember thinking, whoever's driving that thing is either drunk or running from something. As it swerved slightly before settling into the left lane to pass, I caught a glimpse of the passenger. A woman, her face pale, too pale, under the soft glow of the dashboard lights. Her eyes were locked onto mine, unblinking, wide with something I couldn't quite place. Her lips were parted like she wanted to scream, but no sound came. I glanced at the driver, but he was nothing more than a dark silhouette, hands gripping the wheel. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the car surged ahead, swallowed by the night. Weird things happen on the road. People act strange. I tried to tell myself she was just exhausted, maybe messing around, maybe sleeping with her eyes open, but something about her expression stuck with me. It wasn't just fear. It was something worse. 15 minutes passed. Not another car in sight. Just me and the radio static. Then headlights in my mirror. The same silver sedan. It blew past me again, the way it had before, but this time the woman's face was different. Her mouth hung open wider, her expression frozen in pure terror. And then, just like before, the car vanished into the darkness. Now I was fully awake. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. No way I imagined that. I slowed down a little, scanning the road ahead, half expecting to see the car wrecked in a ditch. But there was nothing, just black highway stretching endlessly forward. 20 more minutes crept by. The road stayed empty. Then the headlights appear again. The same damn car. This time, it didn't pass. It stayed behind me, just far enough that I could barely make out its shape. I couldn't do this anymore. My hand shook as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? I felt ridiculous even saying it, but I told them. A silver sedan had passed me twice, the same terrified woman in the passenger seat, and now it was following me. The dispatcher was calm, professional. She asked for my location. I rattled it off. Sir, there are no reports of any vehicle matching that description on your route. That didn't mean much, but it unsettled me anyway. She told me to keep driving toward Fallon, said an officer would be on the lookout. I thanked her, hung up, and checked my mirror. The car was gone, not slowing down, not pulling off the side of the road, just gone. I must have checked my mirrors every 10 seconds for the next hour. Nothing. By the time I reached Fallon, I pulled into a gas station just to get my bearings. The lot was mostly empty except for a trucker fueling up. The air smelled like diesel. Normal. Safe. Just to be sure, I asked the cashier if he'd seen a silver sedan pass through recently. He thought for a second, then shook his head. Not in the last couple hours, man. I didn't say anything, just nodded, paid for my coffee, and got back in my rig. I made it to Reno without seeing another trace of that car, but the whole drive I felt off, like I wasn't alone in the truck, like someone was watching me. I checked the news the next morning, looked for reports of a missing woman, an accident, anything. Nothing. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe exhaustion played tricks on me. Maybe it was some weird coincidence. But part of me, a big part, thinks that woman was trying to tell me something. And whatever it was, I didn't stick around to find out. It was the summer of '96, and I was team driving with a guy named John. We picked up a load in Detroit and were hauling through Missouri, heading toward Tulsa. I took the first shift, driving 10 straight hours through relentless rain, my hands stiff from gripping the wheel. I was dead tired. Before I crawled into the sleeper, John grinned at me and said, "If we get killed, I'll haunt you." I laughed, told him to shut up, then zipped up the curtain and put on my cousin Vinny to fall asleep to. Somewhere deep in the bunk, half asleep, a thought crossed my mind. What would I do if we went off the road? If we were about to crash? My gut answer was simple. Hit the floor and pray. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember, John's voice cut through the darkness. "Hang on." I felt it immediately. The truck was weaving. Then he yelled again. I hit the floor, curled into a ball, and squeezed my eyes shut. The impact was instant and violent. The entire rig vibrated as we slammed into something. But we didn't stop. We were still moving. We had jackknifed, launched across the median, straight into oncoming traffic. When the truck finally came to a stop, I unzipped the curtain. The windshield was shattered. Smoke curled from the crumpled hood. We had flipped. John and I scrambled out, barefoot on wet pavement, the acrid scent of diesel thick in the air. The pickup we hit, an old white Ford, was mangled beyond recognition. People ran toward it, fire extinguishers in hand. I don't remember much after that. Everything felt like a dream. I remember the paramedics speaking to someone in the truck, their faces heavy with sympathy. I remember hearing them say, "I'm so sorry." In the ambulance, I stared out the back window as the scene faded behind us. I started crying. When we got to the hospital, they told us. The man, his wife, their 4-year-old daughter, gone. I stood in my socks on the ER floor, still smelling diesel and rain. Later, I learned that stretch of highway was called Blood Alley. Too many crashes, too many deaths. Months later, I drove through the same spot. They had patched the road, but too late for the family we hit. Even now, I think about that night, about what John said before we started driving. If we get killed, I'll haunt you. And sometimes, when I wake up in the dead of night, I swear I hear him laughing in the dark. What do you think? Have you ever seen something on the road you couldn't explain? On August 5, 1993, a team of experienced mountaineers set out to conquer the treacherous Silver Peak Range in Montana. The group consisted of 7 hikers, led by Lydia Corbin, a seasoned outdoorswoman with years of survival expertise. Among her team was 24-year-old Tanya Phillips, Dennis Carter, and 23-year-old Sam Kingston, whom Lydia had practically raised as her own son. The rest of the team, a mix of young, eager hikers, admired Lydia and were determined to prove themselves under her leadership. They began their trek on the morning of August 2nd, alongside other hiking groups in the region. Although the weather forecast had predicted clear conditions, an unexpected cold front rolled in, bringing freezing rain and snow. Despite this, the team pushed forward. They were young, determined, and willing to endure any hardship to earn Lydia's respect. Lydia, known for her tough but calculated approach, made some questionable decisions along the way. On the night of August 4th, she instructed the group to set up camp on an exposed mountainside, 4 miles from the nearest tree line. That night, a violent thunderstorm raged overhead, leaving them completely vulnerable to the elements. For someone with Lydia's vast experience, it was an odd choice, one that, in hindsight, felt deliberate. The following morning, as they packed their gear and prepared to descend, Sam Kingston suddenly collapsed. His nose, ears, and mouth began to pour blood, soaking into the snow beneath him. Within seconds, he was dead. The others stood in stunned silence. Sam had been perfectly healthy just moments before, strong, capable, and showing no signs of distress. Lydia, the most shaken of them all, screamed for the group to get off the mountain, instructing them to leave while she stayed with Sam's body. They hesitated but ultimately obeyed. No more than a minute later, Lydia's blood-curdling screams echoed through the peaks. They rushed back, only to find her collapsed beside Sam, blood gushing from her face. 2 of their strongest members gone within minutes. Panic set in. Then it got worse. According to the only survivor, Valerie Hutchins, the horror unfolded rapidly. Moments after discovering Lydia's body, Tim Reist and Vicky Summers began clawing at their own skin, stripping off their clothes as if burning from the inside. Their bodies convulsed, and thick foam spilled from their mouths as they collapsed. Valerie described Dennis suddenly hiding behind the rocks, eyes wide with terror, while Tanya began bashing her head against a boulder. They just lost their minds, Valerie later recounted. Vicky and Tim started laughing hysterically, but their eyes were wild, like they weren't really there. When I tried to help Vicky, she bit me hard. Dennis and Valerie were the only ones still standing. They locked eyes. Without hesitation, Dennis whispered, "Run." They took off, sprinting down the mountain, but Dennis soon stumbled, clutching his chest. When Valerie turned back, she saw him lying on the ground, blood oozing from every orifice. Now completely alone, she ran until her legs gave out. With no provisions and miles from civilization, she was forced to spend the night alone in the freezing wilderness. The next morning, driven by an eerie sense of duty, Valerie made her way back up the slope, praying, somehow, that someone had survived. She found only carnage. Her friends' bodies were contorted in unnatural positions, faces frozen in expressions of unimaginable pain. For 3 days, she wandered the mountains, disoriented, traumatized, and lost, before she stumbled upon an abandoned mining town. The sight of crumbling buildings and rusted machinery did little to ease her fear. It felt like she had walked straight into another nightmare. When Valerie finally found civilization, she was too shaken to speak, but authorities immediately launched a search and rescue operation. It took a month before the bodies were recovered. By then, wild animals had begun feasting on them. One rescuer later described the scene. Their bodies were twisted, their mouths and eye sockets crawling with worms. The stench was unbearable. We packed them in plastic bags, but in the helicopter, the smell was impossible. Some of us got sick. The autopsies were baffling. Each victim was otherwise healthy, yet their lungs were filled with massive bruising, as if they had suffocated from the inside. Theories spread like wildfire. Asterisk, a deadly sickness. Asterisk, toxic gas from a hidden government test site. Asterisk, a mass hysteria-induced breakdown. Strangely, other hiking groups in the same area remained completely unaffected. So what happened that day? Even now, no one knows for sure. But if you ever find yourself in the Silver Peak range, remember this. Stay away from the exposed ridges, and if you hear someone screaming your name in the distance, let's rewind the clock back to February 1st and take a trip to Yakima County, Washington. On Route 24 near Moxie, a man was found lying dead in the middle of the road. He was middle-aged, wore glasses, and was dressed in a military-style outfit with work boots. There were no substances in his system, and he was believed to be the victim of a hit and run. A Chevrolet Camaro was spotted speeding away from the scene around the time he died. Since he wasn't carrying any form of identification, his identity remained a mystery. He would stay a John Doe for another 10 years. But that's not even the crazy part. The day before John Doe's body was discovered in Yakima County, 1,600 miles away in Amarillo, Texas, Karen Glenn Lewis and her daughter were returning home from a shopping weekend in Dallas. They opened their front door, expecting to find their husband and father, David Glenn Lewis, waiting for them inside. But the house was empty. Stranger still, David's wedding ring and watch had been left on the kitchen counter. The TV was on, and a tape that had been manually set to record the Super Bowl was still running, despite the fact that the game was long over. There were 2 freshly made turkey sandwiches in the fridge. There was no note, no indication of where David had gone. It seemed as if he had left suddenly and in a hurry. But why had he left his ring and watch behind in plain view? The following day, when David still hadn't returned home, the same morning that John Doe's body was discovered, Karen filed a missing persons report. Detectives searched the house and found no signs of a struggle or forced entry. It appeared as if David had left on his own volition. That didn't make sense, though. David was a devoted family man with a stable job, no history of erratic behavior, and as far as anyone knew, a sound state of mind. Then, a crucial clue surfaced. David's car was found in downtown Amarillo. Under the driver's side floor mat were his house and car keys. His credit cards and driver's license were neatly tucked inside the glove box. Everything David owned was accounted for. The only thing missing was David himself. That's when Karen told the detectives something chilling. Just before he disappeared, David had confided in her that his life was in danger. He refused to go into detail, only saying that someone had been threatening him. This is where his job comes into play. David was an attorney, and even the most amicable attorneys make enemies. Though no one knows exactly who was threatening him or why, it could have been a former client who felt betrayed. Or it could have had something to do with a case David had been working on. His law firm was locked in a heated dispute with a wealthy client, and David was scheduled to testify against his own company. He had told his father that at the deposition he planned to tell the truth, no matter who it hurt. The firm stood to lose a lot of money if David refused to lie. It's possible that someone didn't want him to testify at all. The deeper detectives dug, the stranger things became. Records show that David had booked a plane ticket on January 31st, the same day he vanished. The ticket was for a flight from Dallas to Amarillo, but David hadn't been in Dallas with his wife and daughter. That meant he had secretly traveled there on his own, followed them to Dallas without their knowledge, and then booked a plane ticket home to make it seem like he had never left. No one knows if he actually got on that flight. Then, the investigation took another bizarre turn. Records showed that on February 1st, the day he was reported missing and the same day John Doe was found, David had booked another ticket. This one was for a flight from Los Angeles International Airport to Dallas. None of it made any sense. A taxi driver later came forward, saying he had picked up a man matching David's description at a hotel in Dallas and driven him to Fort Worth International Airport on February 1st. The driver remembered him well because the man was extremely nervous and fumbled with a wad of $100 bills while paying the fare. With no other leads, the case went cold. For 10 years, David Glenn Lewis was a missing person, and the John Doe in Washington remained unidentified. Then, in 2003, a detective named Pat Ditter made a connection between the two cases. A DNA test confirmed what hadn't been obvious at first. David Glenn Lewis was the man found dead in the middle of Route 24 in Washington. This revelation answered one question but raised 100 more. Why was he in Washington in the first place? How did he get there? Why was he wearing a military uniform? Why had he secretly booked those bizarre plane tickets? What business did he have in Los Angeles? Did he really book those tickets? Or was someone else pulling the strings? Did any of this have to do with the threats against his life? And most of all, was the hit and run truly an accident? No one has ever been able to answer these questions. Police ruled out foul play, and the investigation was officially closed. So there we have it, the two mysteries of the Yakima County John Doe and the disappearance of David Glenn Lewis turned out to be one and the same. But the puzzle remains incomplete. The missing pieces still elude us. It's a case that continues to baffle professional investigators and internet sleuths alike, even all these years later. Maybe one day, the truth will come to light. Maybe David's family will finally get the closure they deserve. But until then, all we're left with is a trail of unanswered questions and a man who vanished, only to reappear where he never should have been. On the morning of July 1st, 2018, the usual buzz of morning shoppers filled the streets, but something was off. The doors of the Patel family's store remained locked. The lights were off. It was strange. Bavish, the eldest son, cherished the business like one of his children. No one could recall a single day when he had opened the store late. As the morning stretched on, no one from the family had come downstairs to unlock the doors. Concerned, a close family friend decided to check inside and make sure everything was all right. The door was unlocked. What he found inside was something out of a nightmare. Hanging from the ceiling in a circle, 10 bodies swung in unison, as if moved by an unseen force. Their hands were bound behind their backs, blindfolds covered their eyes, tape sealed their mouths, and cotton plugs filled their ears. Each face was obscured by cloth, erasing any last trace of identity. Beneath them, 5 wooden stools stood as silent witnesses to the scene. In another room, the family matriarch, 77-year-old Nana, lay motionless on the floor. Unlike the others, her body bore the unmistakable signs of suffocation. The Patel family was gone. Their friend ran outside, shouting for help. Within minutes, authorities arrived, launching an investigation into one of the most baffling and disturbing cases in recent history. Who could have done this? The Patel family was respected, well-liked, and had no known enemies. If this was a crime, why were the bodies arranged so ritualistically? And why was Nana's death different from the others? An autopsy revealed that every single one of them had died without a struggle. There were no drugs, no toxins, nothing unnatural in their systems. The first question investigators needed to answer: was this murder or something else entirely? The fact that there were 5 stools beneath the bodies and no visible resistance suggested they had done this to themselves. But how? How could they have tied their own hands? How could they have covered their own faces, ears, and mouths? Some of them still had their feet touching the ground. It didn't add up. Then came another chilling discovery. Inside a bedroom drawer, 8 cell phones, belonging to the family, had been wrapped in tape and hidden. Someone had deliberately cut off their communication before the night of the incident. But why? Detectives soon focused their attention on one man, Lalit, the 45-year-old second son. He had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to the tragedy, speaking of visions and hearing voices. He told the family that their deceased father had been appearing to him, trying to take control of him. He wasn't just talking about spirits. He was convinced his father was possessing him. When investigators searched the home further, they found something even more disturbing. 11 notebooks, filled with years of writings, all belonging to Lalit. They weren't just diaries. They were instructions. For 11 years, Lalit had documented his obsession with moksha, a belief in achieving salvation through ritual. He had slowly pulled his family into his world, convincing them that their father's spirit was guiding them. The notebooks described detailed rituals, prayers, fasting, and spiritual practices meant to bring them closer to their father's presence. But then there were other instructions. One entry described exactly how the family should prepare for a final ritual, the one that would supposedly allow them to meet their patriarch in the afterlife. It instructed them to tie their own hands, cover their eyes, ears, and mouths, and stand together in a specific formation. It even explained how Naina, due to her age, should remain on the floor while the others completed the ritual above her. The family had followed his notes to the letter. Authorities realized something even more disturbing. They never intended to die. One of Lalit's last entries read, "When the ritual is done, everyone will help untie each other." It was as if they expected to return. The family had been making future plans. Priyanka, one of the daughters, was set to be married the following week. There were wedding preparations in the house. They had talked about performing the ritual again for another relative's good fortune. It was clear they believed they were partaking in something spiritual, not fatal. But somehow, in their blind devotion, none of them realized the true consequences of what they were doing. Lalit had led them into a ritual they would never walk away from. The official conclusion was shared psychotic disorder, a rare phenomenon where delusions become contagious within a close-knit group. But even with that explanation, one question remains unanswered. How does one man convince 10 people, his wife, siblings, nieces, nephews, and even his elderly mother, to follow him into death? Even now, some refuse to believe that the Patel family did this to themselves. Maybe there was someone else involved. Maybe there was another presence in that house that night, one they all believed in so much they were willing to follow it beyond the veil. With no other evidence, no suspects, and no clear motive beyond belief itself, the case is officially closed. But for those who look deeper, it still doesn't feel like it should be. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Last month, my husband, Ethan, and I planned a quiet weekend at our old family farmhouse in rural Missouri. Ethan serves in the U.S. Army, stationed at Fort Leonard Wood, but at the last minute, his request for leave was denied. He told me I should still go and bring the kids, Addison, who's 8, and Connor, who just turned 5. A simple getaway, nothing complicated. I've been driving trucks for years, a skill I picked up from my dad, who spent most of his life running long hauls. So I loaded up the kids into our old Dodge Ram and hit the road alone. The farmhouse sits about 3 hours outside of Springfield, near a tiny town called Willow Falls. It's mostly back roads and rolling farmland, long stretches of 2-lane highway with barely any traffic. That day, June 15th, the weather was warm, maybe in the low 80s, with a slight breeze. The kids were in the back, flipping through coloring books, rummaging through their snack bags. It was one of those peaceful drives where the world feels simple, like a road trip from your childhood. Then, about an hour in, I noticed a car behind us, a beat-up maroon sedan. At first, it didn't seem unusual, just another vehicle sharing the road. But after 10 minutes, I realized something strange. The sedan wasn't trying to pass, even though we were on an open stretch with a dotted line. It just hung back, a few car lengths behind, perfectly matching my speed. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe it was just coincidence. A cautious driver zoning out on the road. But the longer it stayed there, the more uneasy I felt. Every time I sped up slightly, the sedan did too. If I slowed down, so did they. The kids were oblivious, still chattering about what they'd do once we reached the farmhouse. I tried to shake the feeling, but the longer the car trailed us, the more that knot in my stomach twisted. After a few more miles, I decided to test my gut. I took an unexpected turn onto a smaller route I normally wouldn't use. The sedan followed. A chill ran through me. I kept my breathing steady, trying to stay logical. Maybe they just happened to be heading the same way. Rural highways don't have many options after all. Then the car sped up, not to pass, but just enough to close the distance, close enough that I could see the driver in my side mirror. Middle-aged man, baseball cap pulled low. I couldn't make out the color of his hair or see his eyes clearly, just the shadow of a face staring straight ahead, locked onto us. I swallowed hard and forced a smile when Addison asked why I kept checking the mirrors. Just being a careful driver, I said. I didn't want to scare them, especially not Connor, who still panicked over thunderstorms and buzzing flies. I spotted a small roadside convenience store up ahead, a perfect chance to test whether I was just imagining things. As I signaled and turned into the gravel lot, I watched the sedan in the rearview mirror. It kept going, didn't brake, didn't hesitate, just continued down the highway like it had never been following me at all. I let out a slow breath. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe it had just been some guy on a long drive, lost in his own world. The kids and I stretched our legs, used the restroom, grabbed some drinks. I made small talk with the clerk, an older man who had the easy manner of someone who'd lived in the same town his whole life. No mention of anything strange. No warnings. Back in the truck, I felt lighter, safer. That feeling didn't last. 20 minutes later, I saw a car in my rearview mirror again. Far back. Too far to tell if it was the same maroon sedan, but something in my gut told me it was. I kept checking, trying to confirm. The way the sun hit my mirror made it hard to see details, but the shape of the headlights, it was familiar. Then just as we hit a bend in the road, it vanished. 1 second it was there. The next gone. My fingers tightened on the wheel. Had it turned onto a side road, pulled over somewhere? I should have felt relieved, but instead, my skin crawled. A few miles later, the kids started complaining they were hungry. I spotted a rest area ahead, one I'd used before. It had vending machines, picnic tables, and a bathroom. Safe, well lit. I signaled and took the exit, half expecting the sedan to appear in my mirror again. But it didn't. The lot was nearly empty, except for one semi-truck parked off to the side. I pulled in close to the rest building near the lights. I scanned the highway behind us. No maroon sedan. No cars at all. The kids ran ahead toward the vending machines while I stretched my legs, scanning the area again. A woman with a small dog walked past, gave me a polite nod. Everything seemed normal, but that feeling in my gut hadn't disappeared. We used the restroom, grabbed some snacks, and sat at a picnic table for a few minutes. I kept my head on a swivel, still half expecting to see that car roll in, but it never did. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I'd let my nerves get the better of me. We loaded back into the truck and pulled onto the highway. I checked my mirrors constantly for the next few miles. Nothing but open road. No strange headlights in the distance. By the time we reached the dirt road leading to the farmhouse, the sun was dipping low, casting everything in that golden-orange glow that makes the world feel safe. The kids cheered, excited to be there, and for the first time in hours, I let myself relax. But even as I stepped out onto the farmhouse porch, feeling the warm breeze on my skin, I couldn't shake one last thought. If that car had really been following us, why did it disappear so suddenly? Why had it backed off when it did? Or worse, what if it hadn't? What if, somewhere out there on those quiet back roads, someone was still watching? Have you ever felt like a stranger was following you? What would you do if the car trailing you for miles suddenly vanished? Between 2010 and 2012, when I was about 10 to 12 years old, my life split between two places, my mom's house and my dad's rundown trailer park on the weekends. My parents had just gone through a messy divorce, and my dad ended up with nothing. The only place he could afford was a beat-up trailer on the edge of a highway, in a park filled with the kind of people you wouldn't want kids around. Addicts, ex-cons, people scraping by. It wasn't safe, but it was what he had. My three sisters and I stayed with him every weekend. My older sisters, Menace 14 and 11, had their own world, while my little sister and I, the youngest, were usually left out. My dad worked Saturdays, so we had the whole day to ourselves. He told us not to leave the trailer, but we never listened. There was nothing to do inside, and boredom always won. At the edge of the trailer park was a creek, hidden past my aunt's trailer, the last one on the lane. We weren't allowed to go there without our dad because of the steep drop-off that led down to it. It was almost like rock climbing, using tree roots and footholds to get down. But once you reached the bottom, it was beautiful. Soft sand, a clear stream running through, and sometimes, if the rain had been heavy, enough water to swim in. My dad even fished there sometimes. One Saturday, we overheard our older sisters talking about sneaking down to the creek. My little sister and I begged to go. They refused at first, but then they changed their minds, maybe feeling generous, or maybe just looking for an audience to boss around. We grabbed towels, threw on swim clothes, and followed them. The moment we reached the drop-off, I hesitated. It had rained earlier that week, and the ground was still wet. The climb down looked more dangerous than usual. My older sisters struggled at first but made it. My little sister went next. I lingered at the top, a bad feeling creeping in my chest. "Come on," my sisters called, "or stay up there alone." I swallowed my nerves and started my descent. Somehow, I made it down without slipping. The creek stretched out before us, peaceful and quiet. We walked along the water, the two small dogs belonging to my sister's friend trotting alongside us, noses in the dirt. That's when we saw it, a massive fallen tree, its thick trunk stretching across part of the bank. We stopped in our tracks. "That wasn't here last time," one of my sisters said. The tree hadn't just fallen. It had nearly torn itself from the earth. The only thing keeping it from completely rolling down into the creek was a thick root still half buried in the ground. We stood there, staring at it, until the dogs went crazy, barking, snarling, running in frantic circles. We shushed them, thinking maybe they'd caught sight of a squirrel or bird. But then, a sound. It wasn't just twigs breaking. It was something heavy shifting. A deep, groaning rumble echoed through the trees, like the earth itself was breathing. Then, the snapping started. The root holding the tree gave way. One crack, then another. The tree lurched forward. It was falling right toward us. I stood frozen, my brain screaming at my legs to move, but they wouldn't. That's when it happened. A hand shot out from underneath the slipping tree. A huge hand. It clamped around a smaller tree nearby and stopped the massive trunk mid-fall. For a split second, everything was silent. Then my sister screamed. The spell broke. My legs worked again. We ran. The dogs, silent now, bolted up the hill. My sisters scrambled up the muddy drop-off, slipping and clawing their way up. My heart hammered in my ears. I was the last to move, but I couldn't help it. I looked back. The hand was still there. It was massive, too big to be human. The fingers were impossibly long, wrapping around the smaller tree's trunk like vines. The skin wasn't normal either. It blended into the surroundings, camouflaged like the forest itself. I blinked, and then it let go. The tree it had been holding slid the rest of the way down, slamming into the creek with a thunderous crash. I turned and ran like hell. By the time I reached the top of the drop-off, my sisters were panting, covered in mud, eyes wide with terror. What? What was that? My little sister gasped. Some of them claimed they hadn't seen anything, just ran because everyone else did. But the ones who had seen it, they were shaking. Nobody wanted to talk about it. We stumbled back to the trailer park, barely speaking, still feeling the weight of what had just happened. The others eventually brushed it off, but I couldn't. I know what I saw. It wasn't a person. It wasn't normal. But whatever it was, it saved our lives. I've spent years wondering, could it have been Bigfoot? Something else? Some kind of forest guardian? It had the strength of a monster, but if it wanted to hurt us, it could have. Instead, it stopped that tree from crushing us. Whatever it was watching. And for some reason it helped. I haven't been back to that creek since. But sometimes, when I pass by woods that look just like the ones from that day, I wonder, what would you do if you saw something save you, but you didn't know what it was? I used to be a full-time police officer. I say used to because there are some things you just can't shake, no matter how much time passes. For me, it happened in March 2021, a moment that should have been routine, but instead changed everything. It was broad daylight. I was on duty, grabbing a quick meal at a drive-thru when I saw him, Dennis Gilder Jr. I recognized him instantly. There was a warrant out for his arrest in Illinois. He didn't see me at first. He had just opened the passenger door of a red car before the driver sped off. I pulled out of the drive-thru and followed. 30 seconds later, I flipped on my sirens. The car pulled over. Another officer arrived as backup, and we stepped out, approaching the vehicle. He went to the driver's side. I took passenger. Dennis was sitting there, his window rolled down just slightly. A woman sat behind the wheel, her grip tight on the steering wheel. I kept my voice calm. I hate to be the one to tell you this, but it sounds like you've got a warrant out of Illinois. Dennis barely reacted. I asked for his ID. He told me he didn't have it. I asked him to step out of the car so I could identify him. He ignored me. I asked again, then again, 4, maybe 5 more times. I stayed respectful, but my patience was wearing thin. Then, everything changed. Dennis rolled up the window. In one swift motion, he shoved the woman out of the driver's seat and climbed over into her spot. The woman tried to get back in, like she knew something bad was about to happen, but it was too late. Dennis slammed his foot on the gas. I stepped in front of the car. Stop. Get out now. My tone shifted. No more patience. The other officer reached into the car, trying to stop him. But Dennis wasn't stopping. I had no choice. I jumped onto the hood. My gun drawn, pointed right at him. For the first 20 seconds, he drove slowly. I kept hoping, praying, he would listen. But then he sped up. 40, 50 miles per hour. The highway blurred around me. Wind slammed against my face. My grip tightened on the hood as the car lurched forward. Then my gun flew off. One of my shoes came loose. My mind screamed, "Hold on! Hold on!" Up ahead, a train. Dennis veered left just before the tracks. We were heading toward a construction zone. The road was uneven. I saw the ditch before we hit it. The car launched over a bump, and I went flying. Everything went white. Then, pain. It shot through my spine like an electric shock, radiating out to every limb. I lay flat on my back, the sky spinning above me. I couldn't move. A ringing filled my ears. Somewhere nearby, the other officer had stopped our patrol car. I heard shouting. But Dennis? Gone. He never stopped. Minutes later, medics arrived. I was rushed to the hospital with a fractured lower vertebrae. The pain was indescribable, but worse than the physical pain was the thought looping in my head. I had been seconds from death. Hours later, the entire police station showed up to check on me. The sheriff pulled up a chair beside my hospital bed. His expression was unreadable. Then he told me the rest. Dennis ditched the red car just a mile away when the engine gave out. Then, he broke into someone's garage and stole another vehicle. It wasn't even his car. The woman, she was fine. She was shaken, but unharmed. Dennis, still running. For a year, we chased him. For a year, I woke up every night feeling the weight of that car beneath me, the wind, the terror, the moment I lost control. Finally, in 2022, they caught him. A year later, in 2023, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. By then, I was back on duty. I had recovered, physically at least. But by the end of 2024, I quit. Because some things don't fade. I forgave Dennis, not because I had to, not because he deserved it, but because I had to let go. When he gets out, I hope, truly, that he turns his life around. But the truth is, I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget clinging to the roof of that car, praying I wouldn't die. I still have to be careful with anything that puts strain on my back. It took a year to recover, and even now, I don't know if I'll ever feel normal again. But I'm alive, and that's something. Have you ever been in a situation where you feared for your life? How did it change you? I grew up in Silver Springs, a tiny town tucked deep in the woods of Pennsylvania, where Main Street had one blinking traffic light, and folks spent their weekends at Miller's Diner. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, and nothing exciting ever really happened. One humid summer night when I was 19, my boyfriend Ethan suggested we go for a late-night drive. It was me, him, and our 2 friends, Sarah and Ben. We were restless in the way only small-town kids can be, aching for something to break up the monotony before our jobs, community college, or the next predictable day came calling. We cruised through the empty streets, windows down, letting the warm air wash over us. The hum of cicadas faded as we left the glow of downtown behind. It was one of those nights where the world felt eerily quiet, like the town itself was holding its breath. After a while, Ethan brought up an old cemetery he'd heard about from his uncle. A graveyard dating back to the 1800s, long abandoned and rumored to be haunted. We laughed at the idea at first, but deep down, we all craved a thrill. So with nothing better to do, we decided to check it out. The road leading, there was little more than packed dirt, flanked by dense trees whose twisted branches seemed to reach for us. Ethan's headlights barely cut through the thick darkness, and the further we drove, the quieter everything became. Even the crickets had stopped chirping. A strange knot tightened at my stomach, but I told myself it was just nerves, nothing more than an overactive imagination. When we finally saw the cemetery gate, I felt my breath hitch. It was an old rusted iron thing, sagging on its hinges. Ethan killed the engine, and we stepped out into the thick night air. The moment we did, the gate let out a low groan, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. A thin layer of fog blanketed the ground, which was odd for mid-July in Pennsylvania. It clung to the crooked headstones, swirling just enough to make it seem alive. I laughed, too forced, too high, trying to shake the unease settling over me. We walked hesitantly through the rows of weather-worn graves, their engravings barely legible after decades of wind and rain. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder, making sure our path back was still clear. Ben cracked a joke about us being grave robbers, but his voice had an edge to it, like he wasn't as amused as he pretended to be. Then suddenly Sarah froze. She pointed toward the far corner of the cemetery. At first, I saw nothing, just swirling mist. But then, slowly, they emerged. 4 figures. They stood in a perfect circle around one particular grave, their white robes barely visible in the dim moonlight. Each one moved in unison, shifting in a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if performing some silent ritual. I felt my pulse hammer in my throat. Who were they? What were they doing out here, in the middle of the night? I didn't dare speak. None of us did. After a few agonizing seconds, Ethan took a cautious step back, tugging at my sleeve. His lips barely moved as he mouthed, "Let's go." Sarah and Ben nodded. No argument. We turned, moving as quietly as possible over the gravel path. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure they could hear it. The car felt impossibly far away, the dark pressing in from all sides. Ethan fumbled with his keys, dropped them, cursed under his breath, and snatched them up again. He yanked the door open, and the second the engine roared to life, the headlights flooded the graveyard. For the briefest moment, the figures were illuminated, and one of them turned. Even now, I can't fully recall what I saw, like my brain refuses to let me piece the memory together. But I swear, I glimpsed a pale face beneath that hood. Hollow eyes, something not quite human. Ethan hit the gas, and we sped off, gravel flying behind us. For what felt like forever, none of us spoke. I kept twisting around, expecting to see something, someone, chasing us, but all that trailed us was darkness. Relief warred with adrenaline, my thoughts spinning in a frenzy. When we finally reached the bright, buzzing lights of a 24-hour gas station, we parked without a word. The car idled, but none of us had the energy to step out. We just sat there, breathing hard, staring at the convenience store like it was some kind of lifeline. Sarah was the first to break the silence. What the hell did we just see? Ben shook his head. I don't want to know. Ethan's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. We didn't argue. We didn't dissect it. Some things, whatever they were better left alone. I remember sitting in that car, the fluorescent glow of the store sign casting harsh light across the dash, feeling like the world had tilted just slightly, like something had changed in a way we couldn't quite name. We never went back to that cemetery. Even now, years later, when we meet up, the story resurfaces in hushed voices, like speaking too loudly might summon those cloaked figures once more. Were they members of some cult? A group carrying out some ancient ritual? Or was it just an elaborate prank, meant to scare off idiots like us? I don't know. But I do know this. On a quiet summer night in Silver Springs, we saw something we weren't meant to see. And for one brief, haunting moment, our small-town lives veered into a place we didn't belong. My name is Michael Carter, and in the spring of 2007, I decided to take a solo trip to New Orleans before starting my summer session at the University of Colorado. I remember the date clearly, May 14, 2007. It was the day I landed in Louisiana after a long flight from Denver. The plan was simple: explore historic sites, unwind, and enjoy some time alone before heading back to college. I had saved just enough money for a budget hotel on the outskirts of the French Quarter. And that's where the trouble started. The moment I got into a rideshare from the airport, something felt off. The driver was too interested in me. At first, it seemed like small talk, but then his questions became too specific. Are you traveling alone? Which hotel are you staying at? How long will you be out sightseeing? I kept my answers vague, but the longer the ride went on, the more uneasy I felt. Even the silences between his questions were uncomfortable, like he was waiting for me to slip up. By the time we pulled up to my hotel, my head was spinning with doubt. The hotel itself was not what I expected. The online photos had painted a much nicer picture, but in reality, the building looked worn down and poorly lit. Inside, the lobby lights flickered, casting a dull, washed-out glow over the reception desk. The only bright spot was the security guard standing by the entrance. Tall, friendly, professional. I never caught his name, but his warm demeanor instantly put me at ease. He smiled, nodded, and held the door open as I walked in. For a moment, I almost forgot about the unsettling taxi ride. Almost. That first evening, I went out to grab dinner from a nearby cafe. By the time I returned, the lobby was nearly empty, just a sleepy-looking receptionist, and the occasional drip from a leaking pipe somewhere in the ceiling. The hallway to my room was dimly lit. As I approached the elevator, something stopped me cold. Someone was standing outside my room. His face was partially covered by a black scarf or mask, and he wore a hood pulled low over his forehead. He was fiddling with my doorknob. My breath caught in my throat. He was trying to get inside. I froze. I had no weapons, no phone in my hand. For a split second, I considered stepping back into the shadows. Then, As if he sensed me, the masked man snapped his head toward me. Our eyes met. My body locked up with fear, but somehow I forced myself to move. The moment I stepped forward, he bolted. I shouted after him, but he was already halfway down the hall, disappearing into the stairwell. My pulse thundered in my ears as I sprinted to the security desk. The same guard from earlier was still there, still calm. Too calm. I explained everything. The man at my door, the way he ran when he saw me. The security guard just shrugged. A half-hearted promise to check the floors, and nothing more. It felt like a brush off, like he didn't care. That night, I triple-checked the lock before getting into bed. Sleep did not come easy. I stayed up late, reviewing my class schedule, trying to distract myself. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, it was 3 a.m., and I was wide awake, because I heard voices, low, whispering, right outside my door. A cold wave of dread rolled through me. I slid out of bed, moving slowly toward the door. I pressed my eye against the peephole, and my stomach dropped. 2 figures. One was the masked man from before, the other, the security guard. They were standing together, whispering, and every few seconds they glanced at my door. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the room phone and dialed the front desk. The receptionist answered in a sleepy, mildly annoyed voice. I kept my voice low but firm as I explained. 2 men were outside my door. One was supposed to be hotel security, and the other was a stranger who had tried to break in last night. The receptionist told me to stay put while he came to check. Then, the whispering stopped. Moments later, knocking. Soft at first, then louder, then pounding. I could feel my knees weaken. I didn't know if I should open the door or not. Then, a voice, calling my name. I took another glance through the peephole. The receptionist. Alone. I unlocked the door as fast as I could. He listened to my story, then gave me a troubled look. There's only one security guard on duty tonight, he said, and he's downstairs. He hasn't left the office all evening. A cold chill ran through me, because that meant the security guard I had met yesterday didn't work there. The real security guard was at his desk. A different man entirely. No record of the other guy, no name tag, nothing. The hotel manager was woken up. The police were called. By the time officers arrived, the fake guard and his masked accomplice were gone. And the worst part, there was no security footage. The system had been down for 2 days during an upgrade. No evidence, no proof, just my word. By morning, I checked out immediately and switched to a different hotel across town. But the damage was done. For the rest of my stay in New Orleans, I felt uneasy. Even now, years later, I replay the details over and over, especially that moment when I realized the polite security guard I trusted wasn't real. He had complete access to the building, even the staff-only areas, and I still don't know what they wanted. Have you ever checked into a hotel and felt like something wasn't right? What would you do if you realized someone posing as staff had complete access to your room? That Friday afternoon felt like any other. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, sitting at my dining table, finishing up a project. It was around 2:00 p.m. when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting a delivery, but packages show up unexpectedly all the time these days. I got up to check, peering through the glass panel on my front door. A man dressed like a delivery worker stood outside, holding a medium-sized box and one of those handheld scanners. I opened the door, and he gave me a friendly nod, explaining that he needed a quick photo for proof of delivery. He claimed it was a new company policy requiring the recipient to stand with the package so the house number was visible in the background. Something about it felt off, but I didn't see any real harm in stepping onto the porch for a quick snapshot. I took the box, stepped outside, and waited for him to take the photo. Before he could, I noticed a flicker of movement near the side of my house. Before I could react, 2 men emerged from the corner. One grabbed me by the shoulder, the other shoved me forward. My first instinct was to yell or retreat, but their grip was too tight. They forced me back through the doorway, pushing me into my own home. The delivery man followed, slamming the door shut behind us. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I twisted, trying to break free, maybe reach my phone on the counter, but one of them landed a hard punch to my stomach. My legs buckled as the air rushed out of me. They dragged me into the living room, towering over me. One demanded money while another kept watch near the front window. I couldn't see their faces clearly. They wore caps and hoods, moving fast enough that I couldn't memorize their features. I tried to fight back. Adrenaline surged, and I swung at one of them, managing to clip his arm. He barely reacted, just looked irritated. He swung back, hitting me across the face so hard that I stumbled into the coffee table. My vision blurred, and the taste of blood filled my mouth. My ears rang as they tore through my drawers, flipping couch cushions, rifling through cabinets. At one point, I tried crawling toward the kitchen, desperate to reach my phone. A heavy boot pressed down on my back, pinning me in place. When I struggled, another kick landed squarely in my ribs, sending pain shooting through my chest. Everything started to fade. The next thing I remember, I was staring at the ceiling. The house was silent except for the faint buzzing of the TV, which had been knocked on but left on static. My head throbbed, my lip was split, and every breath burned in my ribs. I slowly pulled myself up, dizzy and weak, and stumbled to the kitchen. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. I barely managed to dial 911 before my voice cracked, and I slumped against the wall. The dispatcher's voice was distant, telling me to stay on the line and remain calm. The police arrived within minutes, sweeping through the house with careful urgency. But the three men were long gone. My living room was a mess. Drawers pulled open, pictures thrown to the floor, cushions slashed apart. A few electronics, my work laptop, headphones, and some cash I kept in a drawer had all been taken. A couple of officers helped me sit down and asked if I needed an ambulance. I nodded, still lightheaded, the pain in my ribs making it clear something wasn't right. Before heading to the hospital, I explained everything to the officers. They asked if I had security cameras. I had installed a doorbell camera months ago after a neighbor's car was broken into, never thinking I'd need it for something like this. The footage showed the first guy dressed as a delivery worker, me stepping outside, then the two others appearing from off camera. It didn't capture what happened inside the house, but it was enough to give police an image of their faces. Later, at the hospital, as I waited for x-rays, the officers took my statement again. I tried to recall every detail, their clothing, their height, any tattoos or scars. But the memory was a blur, the entire ordeal happening so fast that I could barely hold on to specifics. I spent the next few days staying with a friend while I waited for updates. Eventually, the police told me they had caught 3 suspects matching the description in the footage. One of them was still wearing the same jacket from the video. The police were confident they had the right guys, but my stolen belongings were never recovered. My laptop, my headphones, even the small amount of cash, gone. The police said it was common in these types of crimes. Items get fenced quickly, sold off, making them impossible to trace. That left me with an uneasy feeling. My personal belongings, my files, my data, all out there somewhere, probably in the hands of a stranger. I changed all my passwords, locked down my accounts, and upgraded my security system. My doorbell camera now connects to my phone, allowing me to check who's outside before I even think about opening the door. My friends and family have been supportive, but the sense of safety I once had is gone. Even now, months later, I jump whenever the doorbell rings unexpectedly. Sometimes, I imagine another uniformed stranger standing there, box in hand, ready to lure me outside again. I keep replaying that moment when I stepped over the threshold, wishing I had just said, "No thanks," and closed the door. The worst part? Even though they caught the men, my belongings were never found. That laptop held more than just work. It had personal documents, memories, pieces of my life. I don't know if they saw or copied anything before they ditched it. The thought of my information floating around is unsettling. I try to move on, but a small part of me keeps waiting for a phone call saying they found my things. Or worse, an alert telling me someone tried logging into my accounts. Will I ever hear from those men again? Or did they pass my information on to someone else? Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Around the first week of February, the campus mood took a dark turn. News started spreading that a fellow student named Mara Murray had vanished. She was a nursing student, though some said she had recently switched programs, and she was also on the track team. I only knew her casually, mostly by sight, because we had mutual friends. In a place as large as the University of Colorado, it was normal to pass people in hallways or dining halls and exchange brief nods or smiles, even if you never formally met. But hearing that someone who walked the same campus paths I did had disappeared was unsettling. At the time, we were just coming off the stress of midterms. My exams were spread out over 2 weeks, some in large lecture halls, others in smaller classrooms. I had finished my bookstore shift by 9:00 p.m. and then spent late nights poring over notes. By early February, things had calmed down academically, and I was hoping for a break. Instead, the news about Mara hit like a shockwave, rippling through campus conversations. Mara went missing on February 9, 2004. I remember that date clearly because I had just finished an evening shift when I overheard people whispering about some kind of emergency. Rumors circulated that she had emailed her professors, saying she'd had a family emergency and needed to take time away. Then she withdrew money from an ATM, got into her black Saturn sedan, and left campus. At first, it just seemed like an odd story, a student taking off unexpectedly. The situation escalated when we found out her car was discovered hundreds of miles away in New Hampshire. People talked about how she had been involved in a single-vehicle accident on Route 112 near a small town. Locals reported seeing her at the crash site, describing her as shaken but not severely injured. By the time law enforcement arrived, she was gone. Her car was locked or partially locked, depending on the account. No footprints, no note, no phone calls. Just gone. Those details, especially the abruptness of it all, rattled everyone. Students disappearing wasn't unheard of, but not like this. Not with a full-blown missing person investigation. The campus reaction was immediate and intense. Within a day or two, bulletin boards in lecture halls, coffee shops, and the library were plastered with missing person flyers. Her family drove from out of state to search the New Hampshire area, and university police coordinated with local law enforcement. Despite the effort, the details remained hazy. No one could explain why she had driven to New Hampshire or what happened after the crash. Friends of Mara described her as disciplined, both academically and athletically. She was on the track team, known for early morning runs and a relentless commitment to practice. She also had a part-time job on campus, which made her sudden disappearance even more baffling. Who would abandon classes, a job, and a sports team in the middle of a semester? Some speculated she was overwhelmed by personal issues. Others whispered about relationship troubles. A few suggested darker possibilities, like foul play, though no one had proof. I attended a gathering in a crowded lecture hall where volunteers organized searches. Students, staff, and even a few local residents discussed carpooling to New Hampshire on weekends to search wooded areas, check with businesses, and hand out flyers. I debated going one weekend, but I had midterms coming up again soon and was still working evenings. Yet the urge to help was strong. There's a certain disbelief you feel when someone from your own community just vanishes. It's not supposed to happen in a well-populated college town, much less under such mysterious circumstances. Mara's family set up a base of operations near the crash site, coordinating with volunteers, sometimes braving harsh winter conditions that made searching difficult. Law enforcement brought in tracking dogs, but reports varied on whether they picked up a trail. Some said the scent was lost a short distance from the car. Others mentioned contradictory timelines about the last known sightings. Rumors swirled throughout campus with each passing week. Some claimed to have spotted Mara in nearby towns, though those sightings were never confirmed. A few people mentioned an unknown individual who might have offered her a ride. Others insisted that she had planned to disappear, referencing a cryptic note found in her dorm room or a conversation she had with a close friend about needing to get away. These theories mixed into a swirl of speculation, making it difficult to separate fact from fiction. In my psychology classes, I became fascinated and admittedly disturbed by how easily rumors gained momentum. My professor highlighted how collective stress or fear could lead people to embrace unproven theories. Some believed Maura was a victim of a random crime, encountering the wrong person at the wrong time after the accident. Others suggested she had staged the entire scenario to start a new life elsewhere. Neither theory had definitive evidence, yet both had supporters. I spent many evenings in my apartment, poring over newspaper clippings and local news websites. My roommates and I would sit around our old TV, watching the nightly news, hoping for an update. We'd talk in circles about the same questions. Did Maura plan to leave, or was she forced? Was the crashed car staged, or just an unfortunate accident followed by a tragic event? There was no conclusion, just collective frustration at the lack of answers. Many years later, I still think about Maura, about how someone could be here one moment and gone the next, about how, despite all the flyers, the searches, the news coverage, she was never found. Some stories linger in the air long after they happen, unanswered and unsettling, and the mystery of Maura Murray is one of them. I had been having a great night up until that moment. Earlier, I had gone to a small-town wrestling event with my best friend before heading to work. In fact, I had arranged to come in an hour late that night, swapping shifts with a coworker so I could enjoy the event. Ironically, I had even met one of my favorite wrestlers, a legend known for his brutal, bloody matches. Little did I know, I was about to experience a level of violence that was far too real. Normally, my shift started at 11:00 p.m., but because my coworker had covered for me, I arrived at midnight. I counted the register and listened as she gave me a quick rundown of anything important that had happened that evening. Just as she was heading out, my best friend Andrew pulled up. He worked maintenance for the same hotel chain, rotating between a few locations in the area. Most nights after his shift ended, he would stop by, grab food for both of us, and we'd hang out playing World of Warcraft on our laptops, since business was usually slow. As he was getting ready to leave, I was still buzzing about the wrestling show, proudly showing off the signed t-shirt I had bought. I walked toward the back office to put it away when I heard the front door chime, signaling that someone had entered. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another late-night guest. But then I heard a loud voice, urgent and aggressive. I turned back toward the lobby, just in time to see Andrew collapse in front of me. Before I could react, a man stepped around the counter and swung a short steel pipe directly at my head. Pain shot through my skull, and I dropped to one knee. My vision blurred, and before I could even catch my breath, the pipe came crashing down on me again. Everything spun as I collapsed onto the floor. Somewhere in the haze of pain, I heard a second voice. Another man, someone I hadn't even noticed before, shouted something about Andrew getting away and finding a cop. Then just as suddenly as they had appeared, they ran. I struggled to my feet, dizzy and disoriented, my head pounding. I stumbled toward the back office, reaching for the phone to call 911, but the line wasn't working. I slammed the receiver down in frustration. Blood was dripping down my face, and a fresh wave of fear surged through me. What if they came back? I locked the front door and grabbed my cell phone. By then, the blood was flowing steadily from my scalp, soaking into my shirt. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911 and told the operator I had been attacked. My voice wavered as I struggled to get the words out. The dispatcher kept telling me to stay on the line and remain calm. I then called my supervisor, Travis, who oversaw all 3 hotels in the area. At first, he thought I was playing some kind of prank, something we sometimes did to pass the time on slow nights. It took a few minutes for me to convince him that this was real, that I was seriously injured. He told me he was locking up his office and heading over immediately. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived. That's when I finally learned what had happened to Andrew. After the attackers sucker punched him, he had somehow managed to leap over the counter and sprint toward the parking lot, just as a patrol car happened to be driving by. He ran straight into the street, flagging down the officer for help. I was rushed to the hospital, where they stitched up my head with 10 staples and gave me morphine for the pain. After I was treated, I realized I had no way to get home, but the doctor and nurses, seeing the state I was in, pitched in money for a cab. Despite everything, my plan was still to go straight back to work. It was December, and Christmas was coming. I had 3 kids to support, and I couldn't afford to miss a paycheck. When I arrived back at the hotel, the it guy, Ted, and his wife, Barbara, were there. Barbara worked the front desk during the day, and she was shocked to see me. She had assumed I would still be in the hospital. At the time, I had believed I had only been hit once with the pipe. But Ted had been pulling the security footage for the police. What I saw on the screen made my stomach drop. The video showed the attacker hitting me not once, but 10 times. I kept trying to grab the pipe, trying to stand up, but I had been out on my feet. He kept swinging until this friend shouted that Andrew had gotten away and gotten the cops. Only then did they flee. My company put me up in a room at another hotel they owned because they didn't want me going home alone. Ted and Barbara gave me a ride there since I was still too out of it to drive. They also gave me a paid week off to recover. When I returned to work, they moved me to the other hotel for a month just in case the attackers had been targeting me specifically. The police suspected it was a robbery attempt that went wrong because Andrew had managed to escape and I had fought back. The uncertainty haunted me, not knowing why they chose me. Even though I was working at a different location, I tensed up every time the doorbell chimed. My stomach would not, and I would instinctively brace myself, expecting another attack. I couldn't afford to quit. I had kids to take care of, but I never felt safe working night shifts again. 2 months later, a detective came by while I was working. He had a folder full of mugshots. I hadn't gotten a good look at my attackers. Everything had happened so fast. But I had seen enough to recognize 2 faces that looked eerily familiar. The detective leaned forward, his tone sharp. "How sure are you?" I hesitated. "Maybe 85%. He immediately snapped. "Do you want to send someone to jail for attempted murder on 85%? I sat there stunned. I had nearly died that night. I had been beaten within an inch of my life, and yet somehow I felt like I was the one being put on trial. That moment stuck with me. I never found out if they caught the men who did it. I never got closure. But I do know this. I never worked another hotel night shift again. It's just too dangerous. Even now, years later, my pulse still jumps when I hear the chime of a front door. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a dimly lit corridor with weak, flickering yellow light overhead. At first, the hallway looked empty, but as my eyes adjusted, I noticed someone standing in the far corner. He was wearing what looked like a hospital gown, his back turned to me, standing perfectly still. Something about the way he stood sent an immediate sense of unease through me. His posture was unnatural, rigid, almost as if he was waiting for something. My instincts screamed at me not to step out of the elevator. Instead, I quickly jabbed at the 7th floor button, hoping the doors would close before he moved. Just as the elevator doors began to slide shut, his head started to turn. I never saw his face. The doors sealed, and my heart was slamming against my ribs as the elevator ascended. I tried to shake the tension, tell myself it was nothing, but by the time I reached my floor, I was still breathing heavily. My nursing supervisor was standing near the break room. Usually, he would tear into me for something, being late, looking tired, whatever he could nitpick, but tonight, his expression was different. His brow furrowed, eyes scanning me as if he could sense something was wrong. I told him what I had seen. His usual stern demeanor softened in an unsettling way. For the first time, he didn't scold me or roll his eyes. Instead, he simply nodded and told me to calm down. He suggested that maybe some confused patient had wandered off to the basement. It wasn't common, but it wasn't impossible. Still, I saw something in his expression. He wasn't just dismissing it. A few minutes later, he grabbed Marcus, one of the orderlies, and we took the elevator back down together. The basement was exactly the same, flickering overhead light, the eerie silence stretching down the corridor. But the man was gone. We checked the utility room, the supply closet, and the locked storage cage where spare gurneys were kept. Nothing. If there had been a patient there, he had vanished. The supervisor let out a breath and gave me a lingering look before muttering, "It's fine. Let's go." I wasn't convinced. Over the next few days, I asked around. Had any patients gone missing? Had anyone reported seeing someone wandering near the basement? No one had heard anything. None of the security logs showed an unauthorized patient leaving their assigned floor. Worse, the security cameras were outdated and barely covered the basement hallway. No one could confirm what I saw. That was the last straw for me. I had already been on edge from working under constant pressure, dealing with the stress of night shifts and enduring the miserable atmosphere of that hospital. But seeing something like that, only for it to disappear without an explanation, unsettled me more than I cared to admit. A few weeks later, I put in my resignation notice. By January 2020, I was gone, taking a nursing supervisor position at a smaller suburban hospital. It was a fresh start, a calmer environment. Still, I think about that night sometimes. I try to come up with rational explanations. Maybe it was a patient who found a way out. Maybe it was an intruder who had snuck inside, wearing a hospital gown for some reason. But then I remember the way he stood there, completely still, almost like he was waiting for me. And I remember the way he started to turn his head, just as the doors were closing, as if he had been waiting for me to see him. I have never gone back to Mercy Hospital. This happened years ago, maybe in 2018 or earlier, when I was still a teenager. My best friend and I were inseparable, spending nearly every day together. We were more like sisters than friends. I had always been into creepy stories, horror movies, and the paranormal, and I had even had a few strange experiences as a child. She wasn't as into it as I was, but she still humored me when I talked about supernatural things. That night, we were hanging out at her house. She lived in a townhouse with her family. The first floor had the living room, kitchen, and dining area, while the second floor had 2 bedrooms and a shared bathroom. Her mother slept in one of the rooms upstairs, while her grandmother had a makeshift bedroom in the living room since she was too old to climb the stairs. Her father wasn't in the picture. In the 10 years I had known her, I had only met him once. He was a junkie, not a good man, definitely not a good father. That night we had planned to stay up late, maybe go to Walmart, back when it was still open 24 hours, just to wander around. Nothing big, just teenage boredom at its finest. Then, something strange happened. I suddenly felt exhausted. It came out of nowhere. 1 second, I was wide awake, texting on my phone, and the next, I was struggling to keep my eyes open. I was half leaning on her bed, my knees still on the floor, when I passed out. It was instant. I'm usually a light sleeper. Every little noise wakes me up. But this time, even though I could still hear everything, I couldn't open my eyes. I could hear my friend's phone playing videos, the soft rustling of her blankets, and even the creak of the floorboards as she got up and walked to her mother's room to talk to her. Before I had passed out, the room light had been on. It was one of those ceiling fan lights, the kind where you pull a string to turn it on or off. She never used the fan itself, so she would always just use the wall switch to control the light. As the room got quieter, I slipped into a deeper sleep. And that's when things got weird. I remember the dream so vividly it still sends chills down my spine. It wasn't just a regular nightmare. It felt real, too real, like I was experiencing something I wasn't supposed to see. In the dream, I was in the same house we were in, but something was different. Her father was living there, and every single room had hidden security cameras, placed in spots where the people inside would never know they were being watched. It was like her dad was secretly spying on whoever lived there. In the dream, I was sitting on my friend's bed, in the exact same spot I had fallen asleep in. A tablet was sitting next to me. When I picked it up, the screen showed multiple camera angles, feeds from the hidden cameras throughout the house. It looked like her dad had accidentally left it behind. But the footage wasn't of her family. The screens showed a completely different family living in the house, and every time they appeared on the cameras, they looked wrong. Their faces were distorted, stretched, hollow, like they weren't fully human. Then the screen changed. A woman was standing in a hallway, staring directly at one of the cameras. Slowly, she turned her head. Her face was rotting. Maggots crawled from every hole, her eyes, her nose, her mouth, even her ears. Pale pus dripped down her cheeks, and her face looked like it was caving in, eaten away from the inside. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I felt my stomach twist in terror. My hands gripped the tablet so tightly I thought it might snap in half. That's when my friend walked into the room, and right at that moment, the light in her room went out. I jumped, my heart slamming into my chest. We tried to turn the light back on, first from the switch, then by pulling the string on the ceiling fan. Nothing. I grabbed my phone, trying to turn on the flashlight, but my fingers wouldn't press the button. It was like something wasn't letting me move. I don't remember how the dream ended, but when I woke up, I was in the exact same position I had fallen asleep in, kneeling beside the bed, my body stiff, my knees aching like I had been there for hours. And then I realized something. The light was off, not just dim, completely off, and it was pitch black in the room. I sat there for a second, my mind spinning. When I had passed out, it had still been light outside. Now, total darkness. I climbed onto the bed, my legs weak, and let out a shaky breath. My friend was still scrolling on her phone, completely unaware that anything had happened. She must have noticed the look on my face because she turned her phone screen toward me, illuminating my face with the glow. I just had the worst nightmare, I told her, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, suddenly alert. What was it about? I'll tell you, I said, still feeling the fear coiling in my chest. But first, turn the light on. She sighed but got up, walking across the room toward the switch. Right as she reached out for it, I blurted out, "If your light doesn't turn on, I'm leaving." She froze for a second, then shot me a weird look before flicking the switch. The light came on. Dim, flickering a little, but it was on. She turned back toward me, rolling her eyes. "See? Nothing to worry, Ab." Then the light went out again. She gasped. My entire body locked up. The room was plunged into darkness. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just listened to the eerie silence that had settled over the room. She tried the light switch again. Nothing. She reached for the ceiling fan cord. Pulled it. Nothing. My heart was racing. My fingers dug into the blanket as my breath came out shaky. I was too scared to move. Then she tried something else. She walked over to the light bulb itself and twisted it. The light flickered back on. She let out a nervous laugh. It was just loose, she said, though I could hear the unease in her voice. That's all. I didn't believe her. My hands were still shaking as I told her everything. The dream, the cameras, the maggots, the rotting woman. The more I spoke, the paler she got. Then she told me something that made my stomach drop. She said she had noticed something was wrong while I was asleep. She had heard my breathing change. At first, she thought I was about to start snoring, but then it got worse. She said my breathing became loud, shaky, almost like I was struggling. Then suddenly, I started breathing fast, too fast, like I was gasping for air. But I had never woken up. That was the final straw for me. I told her I needed to leave. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. She hesitated, then said she was creeped out too. She didn't want me to leave just yet. She didn't want to be alone. Instead, she suggested we go to Walmart for some fresh air to shake off the nerves. I agreed, but when we got back, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I wanted to leave, but she convinced me to stay the night. Nothing else happened after that. No more nightmares. No more strange breathing. no more flickering lights. Eventually, I moved past it. But every once in a while, it still gives me chills. Because the way that light went out in my dream and in real life, it was exactly the same. She doesn't live there anymore, but her family still does. And sometimes I wonder if whatever was there that night is still there. In 2017, Jessica Ford, a popular travel vlogger, visited Devil's Hollow Lake in Arizona, a remote body of water known for its deep crimson hue. The lake had long been the subject of urban legends, with locals claiming it was cursed, the site of disappearances, strange visions, and ghostly whispers at night. In reality, the lake's blood-red color was the result of chemical runoff from an abandoned gold mining operation, which had contaminated the water with highly acidic metals. Scientists warned that the lake was toxic. Its pH levels were lower than battery acid. Yet travelers and thrill seekers were drawn to it, lured by the eerie, unnatural landscape and the mystery surrounding it. Jessica uploaded a YouTube vlog about her visit, where she and her partner could be heard joking about how unnerving the place felt. This is exactly how horror movies start. Her partner laughed as the camera panned over the still, red waters. But neither of them noticed what the camera had captured. At the edge of the lake, a suitcase was barely visible, half submerged, its corner poking out of the water. No one watching the video thought much of it. Then, 2 years later, in 2019, authorities made a horrifying discovery. A former military officer, Nathan Morales, was arrested in Nevada after a routine traffic stop. Investigators linked him to the disappearance and murder of 5 women and 2 young girls, all of whom had vanished over the past 3 years. Morales confessed to the killings without hesitation. When asked what he had done with their bodies, he answered coldly, "I put them in suitcases and dumped 3 of them in Devil's Hollow Lake." The case shook the nation. The victims were all domestic workers from overseas, women who had come to the U.S. hoping for a better life. Morales had targeted them specifically, knowing that their cases would receive less attention from authorities. His confidence had been justified. For years, police had dismissed their disappearances, never connecting the dots. As investigators searched the lake, divers recovered 2 of the suitcases, confirming that they contained human remains. Though they never publicly stated what was inside the third, many believe that the suitcase from Jessica's video was one of them. Jessica, upon realizing what her footage had unknowingly captured, immediately deleted the video from her channel. She later issued a statement explaining that she wanted the focus to remain on the victims, not on her tourist experience at the lake. Nathan Morales was convicted and sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences. But what unsettled many was the lake itself. Even before the case, locals had always spoken of strange occurrences around Devil's Hollow. Some said they had seen shadowy figures moving just beneath the surface at night, as if something unnatural lurked beneath the crimson water. After Morales' arrest, those stories only grew. Some claim that on quiet nights, you can hear whispers rising from the lake, the voices of those who were never found. Others swear that if you stare too long into the red water, you'll see something staring back at you. And that suitcase, it was never retrieved. Back in 2017, travel vlogger Sarah Mitchell and her fiancé Ethan Carter set out on a road trip through the backroads of Oregon, hunting for eerie and forgotten places to feature on their channel. One of their most bizarre stops was at Devil's Hollow Lake, a place locals whispered about but rarely visited. At first glance, it looked like something straight out of a horror movie, deep red water, motionless and thick, almost as if the lake itself were alive. Many claimed the place was cursed, its unnatural color a sign of some ancient evil buried beneath the surface. Others spoke of missing people, strange figures appearing in the fog and voices that called from the water late at night. In reality, the lake's crimson hue came from an abandoned mining operation in the 1950s, where toxic runoff had seeped into the water for decades. Scientists warned people never to touch the lake, as its high acidity could burn the skin, a fact that only made its ghost stories even more terrifying. Sarah and Ethan, fascinated yet unsettled, filmed their surroundings for a YouTube travel vlog. In the footage, their voices could be heard, joking nervously. "This is literally how horror stories start," Ethan said with a laugh. "Yeah, some haunted lake where people vanish. No thanks," Sarah replied, shifting uneasily. They had no idea what their camera had captured. The unnoticed horror. The video sat on Sarah's YouTube channel for 2 years, drawing thousands of views, with viewers captivated by the eerie stillness of the blood-colored lake. No one paid attention to what was lurking in the background. That was until 2019, when headlines exploded across the nation. A man named Richard Hale, a former military officer and long-haul truck driver, was arrested after a shocking confession. He had murdered 5 women and 2 children over a 3-year period. His victims were undocumented workers who had few ties to the area, people he knew would not be missed. Under interrogation, Hale revealed what he had done with the bodies. "I packed them in suitcases and dropped them into Devil's Hollow." Authorities dredged the lake, enduring the thick, acidic waters, and what they found sent shockwaves through the small town of Pine Hollow. 2 of the suitcases were recovered, their zippers corroded, the contents horrifyingly preserved in the toxic sludge. Then, someone online made a chilling connection. A viewer rewatched Sarah's old video and pointed out something that had gone unnoticed for years. A dark object floating near the shore, barely visible through the thick, crimson water. It was a suitcase. The internet erupted with speculation. Had Sarah and Ethan unknowingly filmed one of Hale's victims before the crime was even discovered? Sarah, horrified, immediately deleted the video. She later released a statement saying she wanted the focus to remain on the victims, not her accidental discovery. Richard Hale was sentenced to 7 life terms without parole. The legend grows. Despite the case being officially closed, strange things still happen at Devil's Hollow Lake. Hikers claim to hear muffled screams near the water's edge, though no one is ever there. Others have spotted dark shapes moving beneath the surface, though the lake is supposedly lifeless. Some say on foggy nights, a woman's voice can be heard whispering their name, luring them closer. And then there's the suitcase rumor. Months after Hale's conviction, a local fisherman swore he saw another suitcase wash up on shore, but by the time he returned with police, it had disappeared. Was Hale working alone? Did he leave behind more victims, still hidden beneath the lake's blood-red surface? No one knows for sure, but locals warn travelers, if you visit Devil's Hollow, never go near the water after dark. On the night of December 11, 1964, Los Angeles police were dispatched to the Hacienda Motel in response to 2 separate calls, one reporting a kidnapping, the other a shooting. Upon arrival, officers discovered Sam Cooke lying on the floor, a fatal bullet wound in his chest. The shot had pierced his heart, fired by the motel's manager, Bertha Franklin. She insisted it was self-defense, but Cooke's friends and family immediately contested her account. The case remains a murky mix of conflicting testimonies, but certain clues might help us uncover the truth. The motel manager's story. According to Bertha Franklin, Cooke came pounding on her office door in the dead of night, frantically shouting, "Where's the girl?" Franklin claimed she told him she was alone and that no one else was inside. Still enraged, Cooke allegedly burst into the office, wearing nothing but a sport jacket and one shoe. He grabbed at Franklin, who managed to break free and retrieve her handgun from atop the TV set. She fired 3 times, missing twice, but the 3rd shot hit Cooke squarely in the chest. "Lady, you shot me," he reportedly gasped, more stunned than angry. He then charged at her one last time before she struck him over the head with a broom. Moments later, he collapsed and succumbed to his wounds. That's Franklin's version of events. But who was the woman Cooke was so desperate to find? And why was he in such a state of fury? The mysterious woman. Earlier that evening, Cooke had been in the company of a 22-year-old woman named Elisa Boyer. According to her, they had met at a nightclub, and he had offered to drive her home. Instead, she claimed, he took her to the Hacienda Motel and attempted to force himself on her. Fearing for her safety, she grabbed her clothes, accidentally taking Cooke's as well, and fled the scene. She then called the police from a nearby payphone to report what had happened. At first glance, it seems like an open and shut case. A famous musician overstepped, his victim escaped, and in a fit of rage, he met his demise. But was it really that simple? Doubts and inconsistencies. Many have questioned Boyer's version of events. Witnesses claim Cook was seen with her at Martoni's restaurant much earlier in the evening, not just at the nightclub. Given Cook's celebrity status, many people were watching him that night. Those eavesdropping on their conversation said Boyer seemed more than willing to accompany him. When they reached the motel, Cook left her in the car while he checked in, which would have given her ample opportunity to leave if she had been in distress. Additionally, Boyer's background raised suspicions. She was later arrested for prostitution, and just a month after Cook's death, she was busted by an undercover officer. Some theorize that she may have deliberately taken Cook's clothes, not as an act of panic, but to rob him. Cook was known for carrying large sums of cash, and it's possible that when he realized he had been set up, he frantically tried to retrieve his belongings, leading to the violent altercation with Franklin. The suspicious injuries. If Franklin's story was true, Cook's injuries should have been limited to a gunshot wound and a blow to the head. However, when singer Etta James viewed his body at the morgue, she was horrified by what she saw. His head was nearly severed from his body, his hands were crushed, and his nose was mangled. These injuries didn't match the official account. Could Franklin have had help? Some believe Cook's manager, Alan Klein, played a role in his demise. Klein controlled the rights to all of Cook's recordings, and his financial interest in Cook's death has fueled suspicions for decades. Adding to the intrigue, Elisa Boyer would later be charged with the murder of her own boyfriend, reinforcing the theory that she was involved in a setup. Yet, despite these suspicions, no concrete evidence of a conspiracy has ever been uncovered. To this day, Sam Cooke's death remains officially ruled as a justifiable homicide. Unanswered questions. Did events unfold exactly as Franklin and Boyer claimed? Or was there a deeper, more sinister plot at play? Given Cooke's legendary status, this mystery is likely to haunt music lovers for generations to come. Now let's shift to another chilling figure in American history, one who managed to live a double life for nearly 2 decades. The BTK Killer, a wolf in sheep's clothing. At first glance, the man in this seemingly ordinary photograph looks like nothing more than a proud father standing beside his daughter. But this is Dennis Rader, better known as the BTK Killer. Over the span of 17 years, he terrorized the Wichita, Kansas metro area, taking the lives of 10 people, including an entire family. Rader's method was as cruel as it was calculated. He used ropes, plastic bags, belts, and pantyhose to strangle his victims. But what set him apart from other killers was his obsession with staging the bodies. He would tie up his victims in disturbing, contorted positions and photograph them, reveling in his own sick satisfaction. The photo in question was taken at his daughter's graduation, just 2 years before his arrest. Even in his day-to-day life, Rader showed his true colors. As a city dog catcher, he was known for harassing single women and, on one occasion, even killed a neighbor's dog out of spite. Yet, despite his cruel tendencies, he managed to blend in, taunting investigators with cryptic letters for nearly 2 decades. The fatal mistake. Rader might have remained at large even longer if not for one crucial error. As technology advanced, he failed to keep up. One day, he sent the police a letter, asking if they could trace him if he used a floppy disk. The authorities, of course, lied and told him no. Unbelievably, he took their word for it and sent in a disk. From the metadata, detectives found the name Dennis and traced it to a local church, but they still needed undeniable proof. That's when they turned to his daughter. She had recently undergone a medical procedure, and law enforcement obtained a court order to collect a sample of her DNA. That DNA confirmed a familial link to the BTK crime scenes. When confronted, Rader was baffled. "Why did you lie to me?" he asked detectives. "Because," the officer replied, "we wanted to catch you." When they searched his home, they found a disturbing collection of photos, some of his victims, others of himself, reenacting his crimes while dressed in women's clothing and masks. The images offered a glimpse into the twisted mind of a man who had spent years hiding in plain sight. the horror lurking in the shadows. There's something uniquely unsettling about the monsters that hide among us, the ones who, by all appearances, are just like everyone else. For decades, children have gathered around campfires, telling tales of killers lurking in the woods. We convince ourselves they are just stories. But cases like these prove that sometimes the boogeyman is real. This brings us to one of the most haunting unsolved cases in American history, the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I once worked as a direct care aide for an elderly woman with dementia. Her name was Evelyn Parker, a 66-year-old woman who had been battling the disease for years. Her only daughter, Melissa, worked overnight shifts at the local hospital, so she needed someone to stay with her mother while she was gone. She specifically wanted someone with medical experience who could handle any emergencies. At the time, I was already working as a caregiver for 2 other clients with developmental disabilities, so this wasn't new to me. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that night. Melissa had called me in for a one-night trial shift at their home in Willow Creek, Oregon, a quiet little town surrounded by endless pine forests and long, desolate roads. She met me at the door, quickly introduced me to Evelyn, and showed me around the house before heading off to work. Evelyn had smiled at me when we met, but there was something about the way she stared a little too long, her eyes unfocused like she was looking through me instead of at me. It's nothing, I told myself. Just the dementia. Melissa had warned me that her mother sometimes wandered at night, often confused and distressed. Just guide her back to her room, she said, but she's not sleepwalking. It's just part of her condition. The night started quietly. I settled in on the couch in the dimly lit living room, catching up on a show while keeping my ears open for any movement. These types of jobs weren't exactly exciting, but they paid well. Then, right around 10:00 p.m., I heard footsteps upstairs. I muted the TV and listened. Slow, shuffling steps. I walked to the staircase and called up, "Evelyn, do you need something?" No response. I listened as the footsteps turned back toward her room, followed by the soft click of a door closing. Maybe she went to the bathroom. I went back to my spot on the couch, but my nerves were on edge now. About an hour later, I got up to grab the sandwich I had brought from the fridge. As I turned back toward the living room, I nearly screamed. Standing in the doorway, barely illuminated by the faint glow of the kitchen light, was Evelyn. I hadn't heard her come downstairs. My plate slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor. "Oh my God, Evelyn, you scared me," I laughed nervously, bending down to clean up the mess. Then she started yelling, "Who are you? Why are you in my house?" I froze. "Evelyn, it's okay," I said gently. "I'm your caretaker. Melissa hired me to stay with you tonight." She just stared at me, breathing hard, her frail hands clenched into fists. Her pupils were dilated, and her lips trembled as she repeated, "I don't know you. Get out of my house." My stomach dropped. This was not the kind of dementia behavior I was used to. I took a step forward, but she flinched, her breathing turning into short, sharp gasps. I tried a different approach, softening my voice, slowly reaching out my hand. "Let's get you back upstairs, okay? You need rest." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, without a word, she turned and started walking up the stairs on her own. I followed closely, watching as she disappeared into her bedroom. After making sure she was settled, I brought her a glass of water and a melatonin tablet that Melissa had left for me. She took it without a fight. By midnight, exhaustion was catching up with me. There was a small guest room upstairs that Melissa had told me I could use if needed. I figured with Evelyn asleep, I could get a couple of hours of rest. I barely made it an hour. I woke up to a sound, a repetitive, rhythmic slamming coming from downstairs. Salam. 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 Every 1 to 2 seconds, something was being shut, hard. My heart pounded. I slowly swung my legs over the side of the bed, my breath shallow as I listened. The house was pitch dark, the only sound that horrible mechanical slamming. I stepped out into the hallway. It was coming from the kitchen. I crept down the stairs, my pulse hammering in my ears. The second I reached the bottom, I peeked around the corner into the darkened kitchen, and what I saw will haunt me forever. Evelyn was standing in front of the oven, slowly opening it, then slamming it shut. Over. And over. And over. Her movements were robotic, her frail arms moving with unnatural force. Salam. 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 I whispered, Evelyn? She stopped. For a long moment, she just stood there, her back to me, her bony shoulders rising and falling with each breath. Then, slowly, she turned her head to the side, just enough for me to see one glassy, unblinking eye staring at me from the darkness. I felt my blood turn to ice. Then, without saying a word, she closed the oven one final time, turned, and walked toward me. I took a step back, my throat dry. Are you okay? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She kept walking. Her face was completely blank. No emotion, no recognition, nothing. As she reached the stairs, she passed me without a word and walked back to her room, where she slammed the door shut. I hesitated, then carefully knocked. Evelyn? No response. I cracked the door open just enough to peek inside, and what I saw made my stomach drop. She was standing by the side of her bed, facing the wall, completely still. I barely slept after that. When I finally did doze off, it wasn't for long. Because the next time I woke up, it was to the feeling of being watched. My room was still completely dark, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. The closet door, which had been shut before I went to sleep, was now cracked open, and in the darkness behind it, I could see a head peeking out, staring at me. I whispered, Evelyn? No answer. The door creaked open. Evelyn stepped out, her nightgown flowing around her frail frame, her eyes wide and hollow. Then she raised her hand. She was holding a knife. I leaped off the bed, shouting, Evelyn, put the knife down. But she didn't stop. She lunged. I barely dodged her slow but deliberate swing, darting past her and bolting for the stairs. She was still yelling. Who are you? I don't know you. I ran out the front door, slamming it shut behind me. Instead of calling 911, I called Melissa, who immediately blamed me for scaring her mother. That is, until she got home. Because when she entered Evelyn's room, she found the knife sitting neatly beside her bed. I never went back. And I never will. It was my first day working for a small, family-run plumbing company in Cedar Hollow, Pennsylvania, a quiet, rundown town just outside Pittsburgh. The company only had 5 employees, and the owner, Dave, was the one who assigned our jobs. I wasn't surprised when my first call was in the worst possible part of town, far out, isolated, and practically abandoned. It didn't feel like a coincidence that the new guy got sent to the most undesirable job. The call? A simple leaky pipe under the kitchen sink. An easy fix, or so I thought. When I pulled up to the address, my stomach dropped. The house looked completely abandoned, its paint peeling, windows covered in grime, and the front porch warped from years of neglect. If I hadn't been told someone lived there, I would have sworn it had been empty for decades. Still, I had a job to do. I grabbed my toolbox, walked up to the door, and knocked. After a few seconds, the door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged man with a disturbing grin stretched across his face. Something about him felt wrong. His smile was too wide, his teeth too perfect, as if his face wasn't used to making normal expressions. But it was his voice that made my skin crawl, high-pitched, breathy, almost childlike. Come in, he said softly, still grinning. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body told me to turn around and leave. But against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The inside was worse than the outside. No furniture, no decorations, nothing. just bare wooden floors and the overwhelming smell of damp wood and mildew. I forced a smile. "Just move in." He giggled, a weird, high-pitched little laugh. "Yes, something like that." I clenched my jaw. Something felt off, but I kept moving. He led me to the kitchen, where I set my tools on the counter and crouched down to inspect the pipes under the sink. I checked the P-trap, the lock nuts, feeling for leaks, but there was nothing. That's when I noticed it. His feet, directly on either side of me. He was standing over me, his legs spread wide, boxing me in. I tensed. "Sir, I need a little space," I said as calmly as I could. He stepped back, but only a few inches, not nearly enough to make me feel comfortable. I tried to ignore the unease creeping up my spine and reached up to turn on the sink. Nothing. No water. I frowned and looked up at him. "The water's off." He tilted his head, still grinning. "Oh, I must have shut off the main valve by mistake." I stared at him. "By mistake?" He shrugged, his grin never fading. I forced a laugh, trying to act casual. "All right, well, can you turn it back on?" Of course. But instead of going down to the basement, where every main water valve I'd ever worked on was located, he started walking upstairs. My stomach dropped. No house has the main water valve upstairs. I stood there, frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then, I heard footsteps, not just his. More than one person, coming down the stairs. I didn't wait to find out who or what was coming for me. I grabbed my toolbox and bolted. I didn't run. I walked fast, keeping my head down, moving toward the door. My fingers trembled as I reached for the knob. But just as I yanked the door open, I heard him behind me. "You're leaving." His voice was different now, lower, serious, almost disappointed. I didn't answer. I just stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind me, and hurried to my van. I sat there for a second, gripping the wheel, breathing heavily. My skin crawled as I looked back at the house. The front window was dark, but I swear to God, I saw something move. I didn't stick around to figure out what. I threw the van into drive and got the hell out of there. On my way back to the shop, I called Dave, my boss. I lied and told him it was just some prank, because saying I got scared and ran didn't sound like something a tough 6'2" plumber should say. But something about it still didn't sit right. I spent the next 20 minutes doing some digging, and that's when I found out. The house had been vacant for years. The entire property was abandoned. No one should have been living there. I called Dave back and asked for the phone number that had placed the plumbing request. He gave it to me, and I ran it through a reverse lookup tool. It was a voice over IP number, a fake, disposable number. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a weird client. It was a setup, and I had almost walked right into it. I reported the whole thing to the local police, hoping they'd investigate or at least shut down the house. I never heard anything after that, and honestly, I never wanted to know. I never went back to that side of town again, and I only stayed with that plumbing company for about a year before moving on. Even now, years later, I still think about it. The grinning man, the empty house, the footsteps upstairs, and the question that keeps me awake at night. What was waiting for me up there? Would you have stayed to find out, or do you think I made the right call? A few years ago, I lived in a small town in Montana. My family decided to move 4 hours away to get a fresh start, away from all the drama. While my parents were out of town searching for houses, I invited my best friend over and called up my cousins. We had an idea. A road trip. We wanted to do something scary. There was this place, an old abandoned asylum called Ridgeway Asylum. It was nearly 3 hours away, deep in the woods just off a remote highway in Colorado. According to local legends, Ridgeway had once been a psychiatric facility for the criminally insane. Some people claimed the patients were mistreated, tortured, and left to rot. Over time, the place shut down, leaving nothing but the decaying remains of a nightmare. The place was off limits, but that only made it more tempting. We left at 11 p.m., hoping to arrive around 2:30 a.m. The drive was fun at first, laughing, blasting music, hyping each other up. But the closer we got, the quieter we became. At 2:43 a.m., we finally pulled up to the dirt road leading to the asylum. And suddenly, we didn't feel so brave anymore. For 10 minutes, we just sat there, staring at the narrow, dark road. Something felt wrong. But eventually, we pushed forward. The road was overgrown with tall grass and twisted branches. The further we drove, the less real it felt. Like we were slipping into another world. The headlights barely cut through the suffocating darkness. Then, finally, we saw it. Ridgeway Asylum. It was massive. The roof was caving in, vines stretched across the crumbling brick walls, and in what used to be the parking lot, an old, dried-up fountain stood covered in weeds. We killed the engine and stepped out. The first thing I noticed? Pentagrams, spray-painted across the walls. Some were faded, others were fresh. That should have been our first warning. We moved deeper inside. The first hallway was long and suffocatingly silent. The air was thick with dust and decay. As we climbed a half-broken staircase, it was obvious the whole place was falling apart. Somehow, we made it to the roof. That's when we saw it, a light, near the front of the building. It was small, like a phone flashlight. We froze. Someone was here. My cousin called out, but there was no answer. And just like that, the light vanished. Let's get out of here. But my cousin had other plans. He motioned for us to follow him into another room. I hesitated, that bad feeling pressing heavier on my chest. For some reason, I wandered into a separate room beside theirs. It was empty, just some old mattresses, graffiti on the walls, and tap. A tiny sound, like a rock hitting glass. I glanced toward the window. Nothing. Shaking it off, I met back up with the group. Then someone suggested the basement. Big mistake. The stairs were practically destroyed. It took us forever to get down, and by the time we reached the bottom, we needed a break. That's when we heard it. A voice. From the far end of the basement. No one moved. The air was too heavy. Then my cousin did something insanely stupid. He walked toward it. Slowly, flashlight in hand, he aimed the beam across the basement. The light swept over crumbling walls, old furniture. Then it hit something. Someone. A man. He was squatting in the corner, facing the wall. My cousin froze. So did the man. For a long moment, everything was dead silent. Then my cousin backed away slowly. We all stood there paralyzed. Hey man, you okay? The man didn't move. Then he turned. His eyes were empty. A heartbeat later, he let out a horrific, blood-curdling scream. And then he charged. We ran. I ran. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. We climbed through a window, crashing into the forest behind the asylum. The trees ripped at our clothes and skin as we sprinted through the dark. My cousin's flashlights were getting further and further ahead. I was falling behind. And then I heard him, right behind me. I ran faster. Branches tore at my arms. My legs felt like lead. My chest ached, but I didn't stop. Finally, I caught up. We found a trail. We thought it would lead us back to the car. It didn't. We went the wrong way. For over an hour, we stumbled through the woods until we finally saw the asylum again. And our car. Relief crashed over us. Then, rustling. From the bushes. A rock flew out and hit my friend. And then he stepped out. The man, grinning, watching us. He bolted toward us. We ran for the car. This time he was closer. We barely made it inside before he reached us. As soon as we locked the doors, the headlights flipped on, and there he was, face inches from the glass. He smashed a bottle against the window, screaming. We peeled out of there so fast, we nearly ran off the road. No one spoke the whole way home. Not a single word. We didn't sleep that night. We didn't talk about what we saw. And we never, ever went urban exploring again. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Most of my parents' paranormal experiences happened in our first home, though not all of them. Some of these events are etched in my memory. They started when I was 6 or 7 years old. Like many kids, my playroom was in the basement. At first, I didn't mind. I could make a mess to my heart's content, and my mom was always nearby, doing laundry. I had plenty of toys, spoiled as the first child in the family. But I had two favorites: a wind-up love bug, a fluffy paint creature with a red heart that would walk on its own, and my Beetlejuice doll, a pull-string toy that could talk and spin its head when I pressed a button. They were my prized possessions. The basement incident. One afternoon, while playing, I heard a noise from one of my toy boxes. For a split second, my childish excitement took over. Maybe it was a new puppy hiding inside as a surprise. I ran toward the box. Then, I heard it. A grinding sound behind me. I turned around and saw my love bug walking across the floor. I froze. I hadn't touched it. Maybe I hadn't wound it down completely last time. Maybe it was just running out of energy. But before I could relax, another sound filled the room. Beetlejuice. His voice. His voice shouldn't activate unless someone pulled the string. I felt a chill race down my spine. Slowly, I walked over and picked up the doll. "Why are you talking?" I asked, my voice small. Then, his head spun around. I hadn't touched the button. Terror gripped me. I dropped the doll and sprinted upstairs, screaming. From that day forward, I refused to go into the basement alone. Not once. Not until we moved 11 years later. The dancing legs. After the basement incident, things only got worse. I started having nightmares. My parents brushed it off, said I had an overactive imagination. But my dreams were too vivid, too real. Many nights, I'd wake up terrified and crawl into my parents' bed. But sleeping there brought its own horrors. I'd wake up to a strange sensation. The bed was moving. At first, I thought it was my dad shifting around. But when I opened my eyes, I saw them. Disembodied legs. Pairs of legs severed at the hip. Dancing. Even though they were cut off, separate, they moved in unison. I could feel them moving. I could see them as clearly as anything else in the room. And it wasn't just at night. Sometimes I'd be watching TV in their bed, fully awake, when suddenly the bed would start shifting, and I'd see them, the dancing legs. They never appeared in my own room, only in my parents' bed. So I stopped sleeping there, no matter how scared I was. The girl at the door. The last incident I'll share happened when I was 12. By then, my brother was 8, my sister was 5. I was in the den, lounging on the couch, watching TV. From the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. I turned my head and saw a young girl. She was standing by the back door, her back to me, deeply focused on something I couldn't see. I barely thought about it. It's just my sister, I told myself. I turned back to the TV. But then, it hit me. That girl wasn't my sister. A cold, gut-wrenching feeling twisted inside me. I whipped my head back around. She was gone. No sound of movement. No sign she had ever been there. Just empty space. The porch swing. The last memory I'll share happened when I was 7 years old. I was visiting my godfather's house with my papa. Feeling restless and bored, I asked if I could go outside and sit on the porch swing. So I stepped outside. And then I was 7 years old the first time I saw him. It was a warm evening in Summersville, Tennessee. I was visiting my godfather's house with my papa, feeling restless and bored. "Can I go sit on the porch swing?" I asked. Papa nodded, so I stepped outside. That's when I saw him. A man standing on the sidewalk. He wore a white shirt and blue jeans. His dark hair was slicked back, almost like Elvis, but something was off. His skin had a strange greenish tint, and his asterisk eyes, they were a piercing, unnatural shade of green. I had never seen eyes like that. The man walked up to the porch and sat beside me on the swing. "Hello, Jennifer," he said. I froze. I didn't know him, but somehow he knew me. "I've been watching you," he added, placing his cold hand on my leg. "You've been a good girl." I forced a small, nervous smile. I tried to make my mom happy. Before I could say anything else, Papa stepped outside. I will never forget the look on his face. Shock, horror, absolute fear. "Get inside, now." I jumped up. The man stood too. He locked eyes with me, those glowing green eyes. Then in a voice that still haunts me, he whispered, "I'll be back for you." And before my very eyes, he dissolved into smoke, vanished. Papa grabbed my hand, a Bible in the other, and dragged me inside. My godfather and Papa dropped to their knees, praying and crying. "Who was that?" I asked. Papa's face darkened. "Don't worry about it. Never ask about this again." But I never stopped thinking about the man in green. He followed me. After that night, strange things started happening. At home, objects moved on their own. I heard voices in empty rooms. One night, my mom woke up screaming. She swore she saw a man standing in my bedroom doorway. She grabbed her gun, but when she ran to confront him, he was gone. No trace of him. No sign that anyone had been there. The next morning, Papa arrived. He walked through the house, praying and crying. Years later, when my mom remarried, we moved to Knoxville. I thought the nightmares would end. But the moment I stepped into my new room, a deep sadness settled over me. Then the activity started again. Voices. Knocks on my door in the middle of the night. I thought I was losing my mind. Until I moved out on my own. And the encounters followed me. Objects would vanish, only to reappear in bizarre places. And worst of all, he came back. He returned. July 25, 2002. I was 22 years old. For the first time in weeks, I thought I'd finally have a peaceful night. But the moment I closed my eyes, I felt him. This time, he looked different. He wore a navy blue jacket. His glowing green eyes burned brighter than before. He moved too fast, a swirling black shadow. Then he stopped. He laughed. And then he grabbed my hair, yanked it hard. Then he slapped me across the face. I tried to scream, but I couldn't move. The next morning, my husband told me I had been shaking violently in my sleep, like I was having a seizure. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "I saw your hair move on its own." The truth about Frank, desperate for answers, I went to see my grandparents. I told them everything. The man's slicked back hair, his unnatural green eyes, his twisted smile. My grandmother began to cry. Then she pulled out a picture. She handed it to me. I stopped breathing. It was him. "Is this the man you saw?" she whispered. I nodded. Terror gripped my stomach. Then she said something that made my world stop. "That's your grandfather." My mind reeled. "No, Papa is my grandfather." She shook her head. "No, sweetheart, your Papa is your step-grandfather. That man is your mom's and uncle's real father. His name was Frank, and he was evil. A soul that wouldn't rest. My grandmother's voice trembled as she told me the truth. Frank was a violent man. He'd had beaten my mom, my uncles, and my grandmother for years. Until one night, my great-aunt finally killed him. To protect them, Frank had sold his soul, and even as he lay dying, he refused to repent. He's followed you since birth, Papa admitted, but I don't know why. To this day, he hasn't left. My children see figures walking past their bedrooms. They hear water dripping when there are no leaks. Objects move on their own. I have my house blessed regularly. It only helps for a little while. Papa once told me I had a gift, but to me it feels more like a curse, because even after all these years, I can still hear his voice. I'll be back for you. I had always believed in strange things. Maybe it was because of my childhood, growing up in an old house filled with unexplainable noises, moving objects, and eerie feelings. Or maybe it was because, deep down, I knew something was watching me. And one day, I saw it. A night at the pub. It started with my friend. I had been keeping an eye on her lately, watching for anything unusual. She hadn't seemed different, just quieter than usual. On the fourth day, we left work, and I invited her for a drink. She doesn't drink, but she agreed. As we walked to her car, I suddenly felt it. A heavy, uneasy sensation, like we were being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, scanning the empty parking lot. Nothing. So I brushed it off. We spent an hour at the pub, chatting, laughing, trying to keep things normal. Eventually, she dropped me off at home. As I leaned down to say goodnight, my eyes flicked past her, and I saw it. A black figure, standing between two houses across the street. It was there for a split second, then gone. She turned to look where I had been staring. "What is it?" she asked. I hesitated. "Nothing," I laughed, forcing a smile. Maybe I had too much to drink. She laughed too. Then she drove away. But the moment I stepped inside my house, something changed. A thick, choking weight settled on my chest. The room felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. My vision blurred. I stumbled, grabbing the counter for support. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. I stood there shaken. Something wasn't right. Fred has been with our family for as long as I can remember. Every time we moved, we'd always say, "Come on, Fred, time to go," and he always followed. He wasn't a bad spirit, more of a prankster than anything. He had a habit of proving his presence in playful ways, like turning on the water whenever someone doubted ghosts existed. But I've seen him get angry before, and when he does, things get serious. About 5 years ago, I moved into an apartment with my soon-to-be ex-wife. Not long after settling in, I started having nightmares. They were always the same. A dead woman clutching a baby, screaming at me to leave. At first, I dismissed them as stress. Moving to a new place, adjusting to a different life, it made sense that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, I started seeing her while I was awake. At first, just in the corners of my vision, a fleeting presence. Then, the whisper started. I would hear her voice, low and pleading, telling me to go. Instead of listening, I made the mistake of provoking her. One night, I was in the shower when I felt an overwhelming chill creep up my spine. It was so cold, I could see my breath in the steam. Before I could react, something grabbed me. A hand, cold and rough, pressed hard against my chest. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, and I barely managed to stumble out, slipping on the wet tile as I gasped for air. I threw on whatever clothes I could find and bolted out the door, driving straight to my dad's house. When I told him what happened, he didn't hesitate. He just nodded and said, Go back in the morning and take Fred with you. I wasn't sure what he meant, but I trusted him. The next morning, standing in front of my apartment, I whispered, "Come on, Fred. I need your help." The moment I stepped inside, a cold wind rushed past me, almost knocking me off balance. Then, before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me. From the other side, I heard crashes, voices, chaos. My neighbors heard it too and called the police. Even with their help, the door wouldn't budge. We tried everything. 40 minutes passed before, without warning, the door just unlocked. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it. There was no sign of struggle, nothing disturbed. But I knew what had happened. Fred had fought something, and he had won. We stayed in that apartment for 2.5 years. Occasionally, I would still catch glimpses of the woman, hear soft cries in the night, but she never got too close. Fred made sure of that. Eventually, I did some digging into the history of the area. The apartment complex had been built on farmland, and the land held a dark story. A farmer's wife, originally from New York, had hated farm life. She never wanted children, but when she became pregnant, her brothers came to take the baby away. Desperate, she ran. She fled with the child, but in her panic, she slipped. She fell from a nearby cliff, straight into the river below. Their bodies were never found. I believe she was the spirit that haunted the apartment, her pain and anger still tethering her to that place. Fred has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. He's our protector, our prankster, and sometimes our warrior. I don't know why he chose us, or what he really is, but I'm grateful for him. Because without him, I might not be here to tell this story. Ever since I was a child, strange things have followed me. Ghosts, shadows, things I can't explain. It started when I was 6 years old, and it hasn't stopped since. One of the first times I truly realized something was wrong was shortly after my aunt passed away. 2 weeks after her funeral, I started hearing footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps. I knew that sound too well. Before she passed, my aunt would walk up and down that hallway with her walker, the rhythmic creak of it echoing through the house. And now it was all I could hear. One night, my sister and I were in our room. We always kept the door slightly open so we wouldn't make too much noise getting up at night. Around 2 a.m, a figure passed by the door. It was dark, almost like a shadow, moving silently down the hall. A second later, a beam of white light followed it, as if chasing after it. We didn't know what we had just witnessed. Maybe it was good versus evil, some kind of battle we weren't meant to see. Or maybe it was something worse. Either way, we were too terrified to move. Things got worse. My mother once woke up to my father screaming in his sleep. I had never heard anything like it before. It wasn't a normal nightmare. It was raw, guttural, like he was being tortured. He never talked about what he saw, but I knew he had seen something. And whatever it wasn't just a dream. The paranormal has been a constant in my life. Some people are skeptics. Some believe without question. I've shared my stories with friends, and their reactions vary. But I know what I've experienced. I know what I've seen. And if anything, I've downplayed the fear, the details, the sheer terror of it all. Because even after all these years, the most terrifying sensation isn't just seeing something you can't explain. It's the paralyzing, bone-deep fear that freezes you in place, the kind that tells you, without a doubt, that something is standing right behind you, watching, waiting. My dad never talked about his past much, but my mom always had the feeling that something dark followed him. It wasn't just bad luck or misfortune. It was something else, something unseen. It wasn't until the night she saw it with her own eyes that she finally understood. She had woken up in the middle of the night, feeling uneasy, like the air in the room had turned thick and heavy. When she looked over at my dad, she saw a black shadowy figure on top of him. It was pressing him down, suffocating him, and my dad was physically fighting it, thrashing in his sleep like he was in the middle of a battle. He wasn't just dreaming, he was struggling against something real. My mom screamed his name, shaking him awake. The moment his eyes opened, the shadow disappeared, but the room still felt off, as if something unseen had lingered behind. Later, my mom found out something that made her stomach drop. Years ago, when my dad went to jail, he had made a deal with the devil for protection. He had been desperate, terrified of what could happen to him in there, and he didn't want to die. He never told her the details, but whatever promise he had made, it seemed like it had brought something into our lives, something that never left. The strange occurrences always seemed to intensify when my dad was around. One time, I was sitting in the living room with him, watching TV. It was raining outside, the steady tap of water hitting the glass making the house feel even quieter than usual. I don't know why, but I suddenly had the urge to look out the window. Standing in the rain, across the street, was a man who looked just like my dad. He had the same build, the same stance, but there was something wrong. His eyes were unnaturally dark, like twin pits of shadow, and his mouth curled into the most unsettling smile I had ever seen. He wasn't looking at the house, just staring blankly at the street. Then, as if sensing my gaze, he turned his head toward me. He tilted it slightly, like he was trying to recognize me. I turned to tell my dad, my heart pounding in my chest, but when I looked back at the window, the man was gone. The street was empty except for the falling rain. For a while after that, the activity in the house died down. It wasn't until we moved again that things got worse. I was 11 when we moved into a new house, and from the very first day, I had a bad feeling about it. There was something in that house that didn't want us there. Every night, without fail, I would wake up at exactly 3:10 a.m. at first. I thought it was a coincidence, but then I started hearing things. Strange noises in the hallway, soft footsteps outside my door. I would get up to check, opening the door slowly, only to find nothing but empty space. But even though there was nothing there, I could feel it. Something was watching me. Walking through the house at night felt impossible. The shadows seemed deeper, darker. There was always a presence behind me, following me, lingering just out of sight. I would rush back to my room, shut the door, and press my back against it, waiting for the feeling to pass. But it never did. For 2 years, this happened every night. It got worse. I started hearing voices. My posters would shift, their images twisting into terrifying faces, mouths open in silent screams. My closet door would creak open on its own, just a crack, as if something inside was waiting. The presence in my room became overwhelming. One night, I lost control. It wasn't me. I know it wasn't. But I could feel something inside me, twisting my thoughts, pushing me toward something I would never do. I almost stabbed my sister. I remember the moment so clearly, like watching myself from the outside, my hands moving on their own. It was only when I ran out of the house, breaking free of whatever force had taken hold of me, that I felt normal again. The second I stepped outside, the weight lifted, like I had escaped something suffocating. But the moment I walked back in, it was waiting for me. Sleepless nights, an oppressive force pressing down on my chest, the terrifying sensation of something crawling into bed beside me. When we finally moved out, my mom cleaned out my closet and found something hidden inside the heater. A Ouija board and a deck of tarot cards, covered in dust, forgotten by whoever had lived there before us. Maybe that was the reason for everything that had happened. Maybe something had been summoned there, something that never left. Even now, I feel like something follows me. I wake up to the feeling of unseen eyes staring at me in the dark. I hear knocks on my window when I know no one is outside. Sometimes I feel cold touches, fingers running down my arm, sending chills straight through my bones. My dreams are another mystery. I see people I've never met, places I've never been, and sometimes, horrifyingly, they come true. I don't know why this is happening to me or how to stop it. All I know is that whatever this is, it's been with me my whole life, and I'm still searching for answers. My story with the paranormal begins in New Orleans, Louisiana, where I was born and raised. My upbringing wasn't easy. It was the kind of childhood that leaves scars, a life of cheap motels and rundown houses, of struggling to survive with a mother too young and ill-equipped to handle the weight of the world. Her choices led us into a nightmare, a marriage with husband number 2, a man straight out of a backwoods horror tale. He drank too much, hit too hard, and carried something dark with him. It wasn't just his temper, or the way he looked at you like you were nothing. It was something else. Something you could feel in the air when he was around. The house felt different when he was there. The shadows seemed to stretch a little longer, the air a little thicker. It was like the walls held onto his anger, waiting to unleash it when we least expected it. I remember lying in bed as a child, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and groans of the house around me. Some of those noises belonged to the house settling, sure, but not all of them. Some were different. Some were footsteps where no one should be, whispers that didn't belong to anyone in the house. One night I woke up and saw something standing at the foot of my bed. Tall, black as night, its face nothing but a gaping void. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even scream. It just stood there watching. When I finally found the strength to blink, it was gone. Years later, I would wonder if it was ever truly gone, or if, like my stepmother's rage, it had just been waiting. My mother, desperate for validation, clung to the idea that having a man, any man, made her somebody. Meanwhile, I was just a little girl, trying to navigate a childhood filled with fear. It's no surprise that given all the negativity in that house, darker, unexplainable energies seemed drawn to it. My first memory of the paranormal is still vivid. I would hear my name being called in several voices, whispering, yet unmistakably clear. It scared me, but compared to my stepfather, the voices felt like a minor nuisance. Then came the objects. Small things would fly across the room and hit me in the back. Not hard, but enough to get my attention. I was always alone when it happened. No one to blame but the unseen. Yet again, I didn't say a word. Drawing attention in that house never led to anything good. The night I couldn't ignore the activity is seared into my memory. I was in grade school and had borrowed a book from the library. A weekly ritual to escape my harsh reality by losing myself in the lives of strong women like Madame Curie or Eleanor Roosevelt. One night, while reading in the living room, I felt I wasn't alone. When I glanced up toward the hallway, I saw him. A man, not quite solid, with large, unsettling eyes and bushy blonde hair. He wore a t-shirt and shorts and stared at me like I was the one who didn't belong. My mouth opened to scream, but no sound came out. Frozen in place, I could only watch as he casually turned and walked into the bathroom. Terrified, I stared at my book, pretending everything was fine. But when I dared to look up again, he was peeking out from behind the bathroom door, gripping the frame with his hands, those large, eerie eyes still fixed on me. That's when I finally found my voice. I screamed as loud as I could. The thing leaped into the air, ran midair down the hallway, and disappeared into the hall closet. My mother and stepfather rushed out of their room. I frantically told them what had happened, but they laughed, dismissed me, and went back to bed. I never brought it up again. A neighbor later mentioned that her husband, who had passed away before we moved in, often visited her in spirit form. I politely nodded, wondering if the spirit in our house was the same man. Not long after, my stepfather died in a drunk driving accident. At his funeral, I felt no sorrow, only relief. Standing by his grave, I reflected on how he had wasted his life spreading misery wherever he went. As I stood there, a large black dog emerged from the woods, walked up to the casket, and urinated on it. I thought how fitting. In that moment, I realized my life was about to change for the better. But the paranormal experiences didn't stop. In my 20s, I made poor choices in relationships, echoing the dysfunction of my childhood. One night, I woke up to the overwhelming smell of oranges. When I opened my eyes, I saw a towering black figure with wings standing in my room. As I tried to process what I was seeing, I noticed my then-boyfriend standing catatonically by the bed, his face blank and emotionless. I whispered, "Do you see that?" But he didn't respond. Terrified, I pulled the covers over my head and prayed. By morning, I knew I had to leave him. Within a week, I had moved out and left the state. Later, his therapist called me, warning me to stay away from him. That night, the winged figure felt like both a warning and a protector. To this day, I still don't understand the nature of these beings. Are they guardians, messengers, predators? I don't know. But I've learned that life is a journey, and the choices we make determine whether it's a good trip or a bad one. We can't control the pain of our childhoods, but as adults, we have the power to shape our futures. Choose good companions, honor life, and when darkness enters your path, have the courage to walk away. I've dealt with hauntings for as long as I can remember. From the time I was a little girl, I've always felt there was something odd around me. My mother says it started at birth, in my grandmother's house. As a baby, I would follow invisible things with my eyes, talk to people no one else could see or hear, and carry on full conversations as if responding to someone. My mother noticed that my voice would change dramatically during these conversations, and it wasn't cute or playful. It was downright terrifying. For years, my mom blamed my gift on the fact that I was born on Halloween. She used to laugh about it, but the reality was much scarier. When she asked who I was talking to, I'd simply say, "I can't tell you." They asked me not to. Things escalated when we moved out of my grandmother's house and into what was supposed to be a guest house. It was set back on a long dirt driveway, behind another home. That's when the nightmares began. I started experiencing night terrors and seeing shadow figures. My mom's behavior changed too. She always seemed scared, though I didn't fully understand why at the time. I overheard her telling my father about water dripping from the light sockets and the walls appearing to sweat. My father didn't believe her and even called an electrician, who dismissed her claims as impossible. But the strangeness persisted. I heard voices and odd crinkling sounds, like plastic being crumpled next to my ear. My parents began fighting constantly, and my mother believed it was the work of demons feeding off the negativity. She once put a Bible under my pillow, and my night terrors stopped instantly. But the chaos around us did not. My father's behavior grew darker, more sinister. We eventually moved into the house in front of the guest house, hoping the change would help, but it didn't. The activity only intensified. I started waking up to my pillow being yanked out from under my head. One night, I saw my sister's blanket floating in midair beside her, her face frozen in fear. Another time, while playing video games in the living room, I felt my braided ponytail lift into the air as though someone was holding it. I thought it was my sister messing with me, but she was across the room. Everyone stared as my ponytail hovered for a moment before dropping back down. The spirits loved to play tricks. Cabinets would open, doors would unlock, lights would flicker, and appliances would turn on. We'd leave the house, and when we returned, everything would be running, faucets, toilets, the shower. Despite moving out, the activity never stopped following me. As I grew older, I learned to live with it. For a while, things calmed down. But when I moved to Florida and into the house I live in now, everything started again. From the moment I stepped in, I felt watched. Shadow figures reappeared. I heard my name being called. I saw strange movements in the corners of my vision. I tried to ignore it, but the presence was undeniable. When I had my son, the activity in my home began affecting him too. At first, he slept fine in his room, but then he started waking up screaming, terrified. I realized his room was the one where I had seen the most shadow figures. One night, as we walked to his room, he turned toward the wall and said, "Well, hello," as if greeting someone. But there was nothing there, no shadow, no light, just the bare wall. Sometimes while watching TV, he would suddenly jump up, point to the ceiling and ask, "Mama, what's that?" He would follow something with his eyes, tracking it as if it moved across the room. Eventually, he would look at me and say, "Oh, Mama, where'd it go?" It happened more than once. Other times, he would run to me, frightened, clutching my arm and crying, "Mama, it's scary. Get it." He would point at the wall or the ceiling, but there was never anything visible. I started teaching him to say, "Don't scare me," or "Be nice, Mr. Ghost." While unsettling, I was relieved that whatever it was hadn't harmed him. Still, it infuriates me that something I can't see or fight is messing with my child. Looking back, this isn't new. I've had experiences in nearly every house I've lived in, from Michigan to Indiana and now here. Some weren't so bad, but others are burned into my memory. I've learned to cope, but now my biggest fear is for my son. I don't know why this follows me or how to stop it, but I hope one day to find peace for both of us. I have experienced strange, unexplainable events for as long as I can remember. It started when I was about 4 years old, after my family moved into a new house. I was thrilled to have my own room, but nighttime brought strange occurrences. I would wake up from a deep sleep, feeling my bed shake violently for a few seconds before it stopped. Convinced it was just a dream, I would shrug it off and go back to sleep. One night, something even stranger happened. I woke up abruptly, feeling myself crash onto the bed, as though I had been floating just above it. Even after 16 years, I can't shake that moment from my mind. Was it paranormal? I'm not sure, but it was unsettling. There was also the sound of the garage door slamming shut every night. The garage, located beneath my room, was rarely used by my parents except for storage. The old door required force to close, and the distinct sound reverberated through the house. Yet I often heard it shut when my parents were asleep. To this day, the sound still occurs occasionally, though I've learned to ignore it. As I grew older, I began to experience something new: lucid dreams. My first occurred when I was 11. These dreams were strange because I was always in the same place and position I had fallen asleep in. In one of the earliest, I was lying in bed when I felt the presence of someone else in the room. I couldn't see them, but I heard their voice, clear as day, inside my head. Strangely, the dream took on a more disturbing tone, becoming something intimate and intrusive. I was too young to understand it, but it unsettled me deeply. The dreams continued, sporadic and months apart. Alongside them, I began hearing a man's voice as I lay in bed. It sounded older than me, though not by much. He would say hello, as if checking to see if I was awake. One night, when I was around 13 or 14, I finally answered. When he asked, "Are you there?" I shot up in bed and said, "Yes, I'm here." But he didn't reply. That was the last time I ever heard his voice. Though the voice faded, the dreams did not. The presence continued to visit me in my sleep. I begged to see its face, but it always refused, telling me I wasn't ready. I remember grabbing its arm, pleading for just a glimpse, but it never allowed it. At the time, I had no idea what an incubus was. I dismissed the dreams as nothing more than my imagination. When I was 17, I became pregnant, and all the paranormal experiences stopped. For years, life was quiet. Then, a few months ago, I made the mistake of playing with a makeshift Ouija board. I hadn't touched one since I was 12, and I didn't take it seriously. It was just a piece of paper with letters and numbers. I thought it was harmless until I made contact. When I asked its name, it spelled out RC. I asked more questions, but it refused to answer. Uneasy, I tore up the board and threw it away, telling myself it was just a fluke. Then, the dreams started again. In one, I was at my ex's house, lying on my stomach, the same position I had fallen asleep in. I felt a weight pressing down on my back. At first, I thought it was my ex shifting in his sleep, but when I glanced over, he was on the other side of the bed, sound asleep. The pressure grew stronger, and I felt myself moving, as though something was happening against my will. When it stopped, I woke up confused and disturbed but told no one. The encounters continued. In another dream, something heavier and more solid jumped onto my back. Thinking it was my ex playing around, I groggily mumbled, "Get off me, Josh." Instantly, the weight vanished. The next morning, I asked him if he had touched me during the night, and he swore he hadn't. The most recent incident happened just a few nights ago. I fell asleep and drifted into another lucid dream. I was lying on my side, facing the wall. It felt so real. Nothing alerted me to the fact I was dreaming. I could hear the TV in the background, the noises from the house, even the sound of cars outside. Then I felt something playing with my hair, twisting and twirling the strands between its fingers. "Whom are you?" I whispered. "It is me," the presence responded, its voice strange, almost unfamiliar. Then I woke up. Curious but terrified, I made another Ouija board. When I asked if anyone was there, it responded, yes. I asked its name. It spelled out RC. My heart pounded. I hadn't thought about my last encounter with the board in years, but here it was again. I asked if it had been following me, and it confirmed that it had. Panicking, I tore up the paper and threw it away, realizing too late that I had never closed the session properly. That was yesterday. I don't know what I've done, or if I've opened a door I can't close. I don't know what RC wants, or why it keeps coming back. All I know is that I feel watched. I feel followed. And I don't know how to stop it. When we moved into the house, my mother was clear. We were not to go upstairs. Only the downstairs area was accessible to us. I never understood why, but I listened. At first, over time, I became too curious, too unnerved by the strange sounds I kept hearing at night. Footsteps creaked on the floorboards above us. Faint whispers drifted through the halls, and sometimes there was a slow, deliberate knock on the ceiling, like someone was trying to get my attention. I would check over and over, but there was never anyone there. My mother didn't believe me. She brushed it off, leaving me to deal with the unsettling sounds on my own. When we finally moved out of that house, I thought I had left the strange occurrences behind. For a while, life seemed normal. I even dabbled with a Ouija board I made myself, curious but not expecting much. When my mother found it, she was furious. She demanded I get rid of it immediately, along with the glass I had been using as a planchette. I obeyed. The activity stopped, and I convinced myself that it had all been in my head. Then 4 years ago, I moved in with my boyfriend. That's when everything started again. The first incident happened not long after my grandfather passed away. I was 16 and struggling to cope with the loss, spending most of my time alone. One winter night, as I sat in the living room watching TV, I noticed the curtain moving. The window wasn't open. It was far too cold for that. I stared, trying to find a logical explanation, when suddenly, a deep, raspy voice whispered my name. I froze. The room was empty. A year later, in August 2005, I saw a spirit for the first time. I was rummaging in our walk-in cupboard, looking for something to eat. As I closed the door, I saw someone walking toward me. Assuming it was my boyfriend's mother, who often stopped by, I turned to say hello, but there was no one there. The woman had shoulder-length wavy brown hair, and she was wearing a bright purple dressing gown with fluffy slippers. She had been right there, but now she was gone. 2 years later, when I was 18, another incident occurred. I woke up in the middle of the night thirsty and reached for a bottle of juice on my bedside table. That's when I saw him. A small blonde-haired boy, no older than 4, standing at the end of the bed, holding onto where my boyfriend was sleeping. He turned and looked directly at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. But oddly, I didn't feel threatened. I drank my juice, looked away for just a second, and when I turned back, he was gone. The next day, I told my boyfriend about the boy. To my surprise, he didn't seem shocked. Instead, he explained that I had seen his spirit guide. He told me about how, after his father passed away, he and his mother visited a medium in South Africa. The medium had described the boy in vivid detail. That should have made me feel better, but it only left me more unsettled. Why had I seen him? And why did it feel like he had been watching me? Around that time, I began having recurring nightmares. In these dreams, I saw a young blonde woman, about 18 or 20 years old, her makeup smeared, her expression twisted in fury. She was always in my bathtub, draped in a clear shower curtain, glaring at me with hatred. She would scream at me, her words silent, her rage undeniable. Then, without fail, she would lunge at me. Every time, I would wake up shaking. Even my waking life wasn't free from the unease. Any time I went upstairs, especially at night, I felt like something was trying to grab my legs. The sensation was so strong that I would rush up the stairs as fast as possible, heart pounding, afraid to look back. It made no sense, but it was real. Now, at 21, the activity hasn't stopped. My most recent experience left me rattled to my core. I was lying in bed when I heard 4 loud bangs at the foot of the staircase. They were sharp, deliberate, demanding attention. The noise happened shortly after my boyfriend had been talking in his sleep. That was something new. He had never done that before. But for the past 2 months, it had been happening more and more frequently. Worse, sometimes in his sleep, he would grab my face with a force that sent chills through me. The timing of these incidents feels too coincidental to ignore. It scares me. I have dealt with spirits and strange occurrences for years, but I'm at my breaking point. I don't know why these things happen to me. I don't know what they want. But I know this, I just want them to leave me alone. For as long as I can remember, I've been followed by things I can't explain. It started when I was 5. My mother and I were in a car accident near Carp, Ontario. She died that day. We had been on our way to visit her father in the hospital in Ottawa. He had been diagnosed with cancer. That was January 1970. That summer, something happened that I still don't fully understand. I was alone in our backyard when I heard my mother's voice calling me from outside. It was unmistakable. I followed the sound to our swing set, and there she was, sitting beneath the weeping willow tree, just as she had been in life. I didn't understand the concept of ghosts then. I was just overjoyed to see her again. We talked for a few minutes. She even asked how my middle brother was doing. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. Later that year, in November, my grandfather passed away from lung cancer. Afterward, I went to live with my grandmother. At the time, girls weren't allowed to stay in homes without a woman present, so my 2 brothers remained with my father. My grandmother and I moved into a small apartment in Almonte, Ontario. I had my own room with 2 beds. One night, I woke up and saw my grandfather standing at the foot of my bed. He wasn't solid, more like a defined mist, but I could clearly make out his features. He was wearing a ring, and it emitted a bright, glowing light. I froze, unable to scream or move. I pulled the covers over my head, and when I peeked again, he was gone. The next morning, I told my grandmother what I had seen. She was quiet for a long time before finally telling me something that made my blood run cold. Her 2 sons had been fighting over my grandfather's ring, the same one I had seen glowing in my dream. One of them had taken it from his casket. The connection left me shaken. As I grew older, the experiences continued, but the figures were no longer people I recognized. Now at this stage of my life, I wonder, why me? Why do these things keep following me, no matter where I go? From childhood spirits to restless figures in every home I've ever lived in, it feels like I am a magnet for the unexplainable. I keep searching for answers, but the more I look, the more questions I find. Some part of me wonders if I will ever truly escape, or if, no matter how far I run, something will always be waiting in the dark. I'm 24 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've had strange experiences with the paranormal. It isn't just fleeting shadows or unexplained noises. I see, hear, and feel spirits. It seems to run in my family, but for some reason, I'm the only one truly affected by it. No matter where I go, these encounters follow me. When I was about 5 or 6, I lived in a house where strange things happened. Every night, I would hear men laughing near my bedroom window, their voices deep and distant, like they were having a party just out of reach. The taps in the house would turn on by themselves, including the ones in the bathroom, and the kettle would randomly switch on. The activity kept getting worse until we eventually moved. Years later, I learned that our neighbors had their own terrifying experiences. Their son had accidentally shot himself in their house, and a year later, their daughter did the same, though she survived but was left blind. They'd also claimed that they couldn't burn photographs of demons, no matter how hard they tried. I believe whatever haunted their home seeped into ours too. When I was 9, we moved into a church house. I thought I'd finally found peace until one night, I woke up to see a man standing at the foot of my bed. He was wearing the exact same clothes my grandfather had worn earlier that day. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even breathe as he stood there. The weight on my chest was suffocating. Then, As suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. I ran out of the room, straight to my grandfather's bedroom, but he was fast asleep. My mom later told me it was probably my guardian angel, but I still don't understand why it felt like he was holding me down. Years later, I moved in with my aunt, and it started again. In her home, there was a tall, shadowy figure that always stood in the kitchen, watching me. If I moved toward the kitchen, it would retreat down the hallway into the bathroom. If I went back to the lounge, it would return to the kitchen. Its glowing green eyes burned into me, always watching, always waiting. One night, during a power outage, I encountered it in the hallway. Though the house was pitch black, I felt it block my path. I barely had time to react before it lifted me off the ground. I tried to scream, but the air left my lungs in a rush. When I asked my aunt about it later, she admitted that the figure had always been there. When I moved out, it seemed to leave too. Now I live with my boyfriend and his parents, and the activity has only increased. In his mother's room, I frequently see a man, a dog, and a cat walk into the bathroom. The cat and dog always go first, followed by the man, who seems to float from the knees down. They never leave the bathroom, but they appear every few minutes, as if trapped in an endless loop. While making my baby's bottles in the kitchen, I sometimes see an old woman watching me from the lounge. Her hair is in a tight bun, her features eerily sharp, but I can never see her face clearly. When I stand in the hallway, I feel something watching me from the roof access above. What frightens me most is my baby's reaction to it all. He often looks at something unseen, points, and smiles as if interacting with something I can't see. At first, I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just reacting to shadows or lights. But the more it happened, the harder it became to ignore. I started noticing strange markings on the windows, resembling demonic faces, but only I can see them. Even after cleaning the glass, the handprints on the mirrors reappear. Every night I feel watched. I keep the TV on for comfort, but the feeling never fades. A few nights ago, I woke up to find a figure floating at the foot of my bed, moving back and forth. At the same time, I heard a popping sound coming from the other bedrooms. The moment the figure vanished, the noise stopped. The man, the dog, and the cat have a black, shiny aura, while the old woman has a dull, gray appearance. I don't know what it means, but I know it's not good. I'm deeply worried about my baby. While the entities haven't harmed him, I fear they might try to. When I'm alone, I hear noises from our room, like something falling, but when I check, everything is in its place. It only happens when I'm by myself, like whatever this is, it's trying to lure me. I go to church, I pray, but the activity hasn't stopped. My family doesn't believe me. They think I'm imagining things, but I know what I've seen and felt. I just want to protect my child. I just want this to stop.